Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto was the sage without a Falna, who charmed the Odysseus Naruto x Freya x Hestia x Artemis DanMachi. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Stranger from Beyond. The grand festival of deities painted Orario in a tapestry of light and sound. Lanterns swayed on strings stretched between buildings like constellations brought low, their glow catching on the polished stone streets slick with spilled wine and crushed flower petals. Children darted between food stalls with sparklers clutched in their fists, trailing ephemeral light that mirrored the stars above. Musicians competed from every corner, flutes, drums, and string instruments blending into a cacophony that somehow found harmony in chaos. Beneath this celebration, the massive structure known as Babel Tower stood sentinel, its impossibly tall spire piercing the night sky like a needle connecting earth and heaven. At its base lay the entrance to the dungeon, sealed especially tight for the festivities by order of the guild. Tonight was for revelry, not adventure. In the northwestern quarter, where the revelry burned brightest, the air split open. The tear wasn't immediately visible, more a ripple in reality that distorted the festival lights, bending them inward toward an impossibly dark center. A handful of revelers paused, wine cups halfway to lips, expressions shifting from merriment to confusion as the distortion expanded. The music nearest the anomaly faltered as musicians lowered their instruments, eyes widening. The air cracked like glass struck by a hammer. From the fissure, a man fell. His body tumbled through empty space before landing in a controlled crouch that cracked the cobblestones beneath his feet. Blonde hair caught the lantern light, wild and untamed around a face marked with whisker-like scars on each cheek. His attire was foreign, a black and orange outfit with a red cloak emblazoned with flame patterns. It settled around him as he straightened to his full height, scanning his surroundings with alert blue eyes. Naruto Uzumaki had arrived in Orario. What the hell? He muttered, taking in the faces of festival goers who stared at him as though he'd dropped from the moon rather than merely the sky. Which, from his perspective, wasn't entirely inaccurate. The last thing he remembered was complex space-time jutsu he'd been helping Sasuke develop, then a surge of chakra, blinding light, and now, this. A child approached cautiously, sparkler held like a tiny sword. "Are you a god?" the boy asked, wide-eyed. Before Naruto could answer, screams erupted from the direction of Babel Tower. Not the playful shrieks of festival revelry but genuine terror that cut through the night. The crowd began to shift, confusion rippling outward as more screams joined the first. "Monsters!" came a distant cry. Monsters in the plaza. The civilians around Naruto began scrambling away from the tower, panic spreading faster than he could process his surroundings. Parents snatched children, merchants abandoned stalls, and the festive atmosphere disintegrated into chaos within seconds. "Everybody stay calm," a female voice commanded from somewhere in the crowd. "Adventurers to the plaza. Civilians clear the streets." Naruto's instincts kicked in before his conscious mind could catch up. Whatever this place was, whatever had happened, people were in danger. He leapt upward, channeling chakra to his feet to land atop a two-story building, gaining perspective on the unfolding crisis. Near Babel's base, creatures poured from what appeared to be a partially collapsed barricade. Even from this distance, Naruto could make out massive insect-like monsters with chitinous armor, wolf-shaped beasts with glowing red eyes, and hulking humanoids that swung crude weapons at fleeing civilians. The plaza had become a battlefield, with scattered individuals, presumably the adventurers, men, engaging the monsters with varying degrees of success. "Not exactly the welcome party I was hoping for," Naruto muttered, forming the familiar hand sign that had been second nature for most of his life. Shadow Clone Jutsu. 20 perfect copies of Naruto popped into existence around him, each with the same determined expression. Without needing instruction, they dispersed in different directions, some leaping toward the endangered civilians, others heading directly for the monster breach. Naruto himself focused on the largest threat, a minotaur-like creature that had cornered a group of terrified festival goers against a fountain. The beast stood nearly 10 feet tall, muscles rippling beneath dark fur as it raised a massive stone axe. 3 quick hand signs, and Naruto felt chakra molding in his palm. Swirling into a familiar spiraling sphere, he launched himself from the rooftop, crossing the distance in a heartbeat. Rasengan. The sphere of concentrated chakra slammed into the Minotaur's back with devastating force. The monster's body contorted around the impact point before launching forward, its massive frame crashing through a food stall before coming to rest, motionless. The civilians stared in shock, first at their fallen attacker, then at Naruto, who landed lightly in front of them. "Get somewhere safe," he instructed, already turning toward the next threat. "I'll handle the monsters." Across the plaza, a small woman with blue-black hair tied in twin tails stood protectively in front of a white-haired boy and several other younger adventurers. Despi. Her diminutive stature, she couldn't have been more than 4.5 feet tall, her presence radiated authority. A simple white dress contrasted with a blue ribbon tied at her throat, and her blue eyes narrowed as she assessed the chaos. "Belle, take Lily and the others to safety," she commanded, her voice carrying surprising weight. "This isn't a normal outbreak. I can't leave you, goddess," the white-haired boy protested, gripping a knife that seemed to glow with internal light. "Hestia-sama, something's wrong with the dungeon entrance," a petite girl with brown hair cried out. "Look." They all turned to see the barriers around the dungeon entrance pulsing with unstable energy, cracks spreading like spider webs across the magical reinforcements designed to keep monsters contained. Hestia, goddess of the hearth and home, felt something she rarely experienced: genuine fear. The dungeon barriers were constructed and maintained by multiple deities and the guild's most powerful mages. For them to fail so catastrophically during a festival when they'd been specifically reinforced. Her divine senses registered an anomaly. Something had disturbed the very fabric of their world. Her eyes scanned the chaos until they locked onto a figure in orange and black who moved with impossible speed among the monsters. Across the plaza, one of Naruto's clones executed a perfect leaf hurricane kick, sending 3 goblin-like creatures flying backward. The real Naruto had created 2 more Rasengans, one in each hand, and was systematically eliminating the largest threats while his clones evacuated civilians and contained the smaller monsters. "Belle," Hestia said quietly. "Who is that?" The white-haired adventurer shook his head. "I've never seen him before, but those aren't magic spells. At least, not like anything I've ever seen." Hestia nodded slowly. "He's neither god nor mortal. At least, not a mortal of our world." High above the city in her luxurious tower suite, another goddess watched with rapt attention. Freya, deity of love and beauty, had been observing the festival with mild boredom when the disturbance caught her attention. Unlike the revelers below, she had seen the tear in reality form, a wound in the world that momentarily revealed something beyond. Then he emerged. For thousands of years, Freya had evaluated souls by their color and purity. She collected the most beautiful, either by adding them to her familia or simply watching them until death claimed them. She had seen every shade, every variation possible in a mortal soul. Until now, the blonde stranger's soul burned with impossible hues, colors she had no names for, shifting and swirling like the northern lights condensed into human form. But strangest of all was the duality within it, as though 2 souls occupied the same space, one pure and bright, the other ancient and primal with a distinct red-orange energy she could only describe as savage. "Ottar," she called softly, not taking her eyes from the spectacle below. A massive, boar-featured man stepped forward from the shadows. "Yes, Lady Freya, I want everything you can discover about that man." Her silver eyes gleamed with an intensity that would have frightened most immortals. "Everything. As you wish," Ottar replied, bowing before departing. Freya leaned forward, watching as the stranger create dozens of identical copies of himself, a technique unlike any magic she'd witnessed in her immortal lifetime. Her lips curved into a smile that had launched wars and toppled kingdoms. "What a fascinating new toy you've sent me," she whispered to Fate. Back in the plaza, Naruto had eliminated most of the larger threats when he sensed a massive surge of energy from the dungeon entrance. The magic barrier shuddered visibly before exploding outward in a shower of arcane particles. From the newly widened breach, a creature emerged that dwarfed all the previous monsters. It resembled a dragon, but corrupted, asymmetrical wings, Scales that shifted between solid and liquid states, and multiple heads that moved with unsettling independence. Its body pulsed with the same energy signature Naruto had felt during the space-time jutsu malfunction. That can't be good, he muttered, as the remaining civilians fled screaming. A cluster of robed figures had formed a defensive line in front of the monster. Their staffs raised as they chanted in unison. Magic circles formed in the air before them, pulsing with energy that shot toward the dragon in coordinated beams. The monster didn't even flinch. It swept one massive clawed limb through their formation, sending bodies flying like ragdolls. Naruto assessed the situation with the battle-hardened clarity that had served him through countless conflicts. His clones were evacuating the last civilians and containing the smaller monsters. This new threat would require his full attention. Kurama, he whispered internally, reaching for the familiar presence of the 9 tails. I could use a chakra boost. The response was immediate but distorted, as though coming through static. Something's wrong with this place, Kit. My chakra is reacting strangely. Naruto felt it too. The natural energy here was different, more volatile, seeming to resonate with his own chakra in unpredictable ways. He'd need to be careful. Just enough for Sage Mode then, he decided. He closed his eyes momentarily, drawing on natural energy to blend with his own chakra. Orange pigmentation formed around his eyes as he achieved the perfect balance, his senses expanding exponentially. When he opened his eyes again, they had transformed to a golden toad-like appearance with horizontal pupils. The change didn't go unnoticed. Across the plaza, Hestia gasped. That's impossible, she breathed. He's drawing directly from the world's essence without a Falna or spirit contract. Bell looked at his goddess in confusion. What does that mean? It means, Hestia replied, that the divine laws of our world don't apply to him. Naruto charged forward, moving faster than most eyes could track. He leapt high, summoning 2 shadow clones mid-air who began forming a more complex Rasengan variant, one that grew rapidly, incorporating wind nature chakra until it resembled a massive shuriken of pure energy. Wind style. Rasenshuriken, he called out, hurling the technique directly at the dragon's central mass. The technique connected with a blinding flash, the concentrated chakra expanding outward in a spherical explosion that severed 2 of the dragon's heads and shredded 1 wing. The monster's scream shook the foundations of nearby buildings, windows shattering from the sonic force. But it didn't fall. Instead, its body began regenerating. The severed parts reforming with that same unstable energy Naruto had sensed earlier. Worse, the creature seemed to be adapting, its new scales taking on a pattern that resembled the spiraling chakra of his attack. It's absorbing the properties of my jutsu, Naruto realized. This complicated matters significantly. The dragon focused all its eyes on Naruto, clearly identifying him as the primary threat. It inhaled deeply, its multiple throats glowing with building energy. Naruto reacted instantly, hands flying through signs for an Earth-style jutsu. Earth-style. Mud wall. The G round before him erupted upward into a massive barricade just as the dragon unleashed a concentrated beam of energy that seemed to contain traces of his own wind chakra. The wall absorbed most of the impact but shattered into fragments that peppered the plaza like shrapnel. Behind the disintegrating barrier, Naruto had already formed his next strategy. 6 shadow clones spread out in a hexagonal formation around the dragon, each beginning a different elemental jutsu. The real Naruto remained in Sage Mode, gathering natural energy for a final strike. Water style. Water Dragon Bullet. Fire style. Great Fireball Jutsu. Lightning style. Electromagnetic Murder. Wind style. Great Breakthrough. Earth style. Terra Needles. Wood style. Binding Roots. The 6 techniques hit simultaneously from different angles, each designed not to destroy but to restrain and distract. Water doused one side while fire scorched another, creating a steam cloud that obscured vision. Lightning Paralyze. Its nervous system momentarily while wind techniques buffeted it from maintaining balance. Earth spikes impaled its limbs to the ground, and wooden roots erupted to wrap around its remaining heads. In that moment of perfect coordination, the real Naruto charged forward, right hand extended with a technique he'd perfected but rarely needed to use since the 4th Great Ninja War. 6 Paths. Ultra Big Ball Rasenshuriken. The massive, sun-like orb of chakra dwarfed his previous attack, swirling with elemental energy in a harmony that represented the pinnacle of his abilities. As it connected with the dragon's core, Naruto sensed something unexpected. The creature's energy was attempting to synchronize with his own, as though their powers shared some fundamental connection. The technique, UE detonated with force that shook the entire district. Light erupted in a dome-shaped explosion that vaporized the dragon's physical form entirely, leaving nothing but dissipating particles that shimmered like dying stars before fading completely. Naruto landed in the center of a newly formed crater, sage mode fading as he surveyed the aftermath. The plaza had been transformed into something resembling a war zone, buildings damaged, stalls destroyed, magical lampposts toppled. His shadow clones were still handling the last few monsters at the periphery, but the main threat had been eliminated. Silence fell as both adventurers and civilians stared at the stranger who had single-handedly defeated a catastrophe-level threat. Then the whispers began. "Did you see that? He created copies of himself. That wasn't magic, was it? Is he a new god? Those eyes, where did he come from?" Naruto dismissed his remaining clones with a gesture, feeling their accumulated experiences and fatigue wash over him. Using Six Paths' power in this strange world had drained him more than expected. The natural energy here responded differently, and Kurama's chakra seemed somewhat destabilized. Why whatever had brought him to this place? He sensed movement and turned to see the small, dark-haired woman approaching him cautiously. Despite her size, something about her presence radiated ancient power contained in human form. "You're not from our world," she stated rather than asked, her blue eyes studying him with millennia of wisdom behind them. Naruto ran a hand through his hair, suddenly aware of dozens of eyes watching their interaction. "That obvious, huh? The way you manipulate energy without a Falna or spirit connection would be impossible for anyone born in our realm," she explained, keeping her voice low. "I am Hestia, goddess of the hearth." Naruto blinked. "Goddess? As in, actual deity?" Hestia's lips quirked in a small smile. "The very same. And you are Naruto Uzumaki," he replied automatically. Then added with ingrained habit, "future Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village." The familiar introduction felt suddenly hollow. What was a Hokage in a world where gods walked openly among mortals? Before Hestia could respond, a commotion at the edge of the plaza drew their attention. A contingent of armored figures approached, some human, others with animalistic features Naruto had never seen on people before. At their center walked a dignified man with hair the color of wine and eyes that seemed to contain galaxies. "The guild will want to question you," Hestia whispered urgently. "And Dionysus brings other deities. Word travels fast among immortals when something unprecedented occurs. Are they a threat?" Naruto asked quietly, assessing potential escape routes despite his fatigue. Hestia considered this. "Not immediately. But gods are capricious by nature. Some will be fascinated, others threatened by your existence." She paused, then added, "I can offer you protection within my familia for now." Naruto had no idea what a familia was in this context, but the offer seemed genuine. Still, accepting protection went against his nature. "I appreciate the offer," he said. "But I don't need protection. I just need information about where I am and how I might get home." Hestia's eyes widened slightly at his confident refusal. Few mortals old decline divine assistance so casually. Before she could respond, the delegation reached them, surrounding them in a loose semicircle. The wine-haired deity stepped forward. "I am Dionysus, god of fertility and wine. This is quite the commotion you've caused during our festival, stranger." His voice carried no accusation, merely amused curiosity, but Naruto sensed the underlying power. These beings might appear human, but they were something else entirely. "Naruto Uzumaki," he introduced himself with a respectful but not subservient nod. "Sorry about the plaza. Where I come from, we usually try to minimize collateral damage. But that dragon thing wasn't giving me many options." A murmur ran through the assembled gods and their attendants. Dionysus raised an eyebrow. "You speak of a floor boss as casually as one might discuss the weather. Interesting." He gestured to the destruction around them. "The guild will handle repairs. More pressing is the question of your origin and nature. A question best discussed in private council," interrupted a new voice, melodic and compelling. The crowd parted as a woman approached. tall and ethereally beautiful with silver hair that caught moonlight like polished metal. Her eyes were the same impossible silver, focused entirely on Naruto with an intensity that would have unnerved a lesser man. Even the other deities seemed affected by her presence, straightening unconsciously as she glided forward in flowing silver-gray attire that seemed designed to enhance her otherworldly beauty. Freya, Dionysus acknowledged with a nod that contained a hint of wariness. The goddess didn't respond to him, keeping her gaze fixed on Naruto. The Council of Deities should convene immediately to address this anomaly. The way she spoke, the last word carried no negative connotation. Rather, she seemed to savor it like a rare delicacy. Naruto met her gaze steadily, unaffected by the charm that seemed to ripple from her like heat from a desert. Years of facing down enemies with ocular jutsu had made him particularly resistant to visual manipulation techniques. Freya's eyes widened fractionally, the smallest tell that his immunity surprised her, before her perfect lips curved into a smile that somehow conveyed both amusement and hunger. Until then, she continued smoothly, he should be placed under observation. My familia will host him. Hestia interjected quickly, stepping slightly in front of Naruto with surprising protectiveness for someone she'd just met. Freya's smile cooled several degrees. Your accommodations are hardly suitable for someone of his evident power, Hestia dear. The diminutive goddess bristled visibly. My hearth welcomes all who seek it, regardless of station. That has been my domain before you captured your first mortal heart, Freya. The tension between the goddesses was palpable, the air almost crackling with divine energy barely contained in human form. Naruto had witnessed enough power struggles to recognize one developing, and he had no intention of becoming a pawn in divine politics before he even understood the rules of this world. If it's all the same to you, he interrupted firmly. I prefer making my own decisions about where I stay. Both goddesses turned to him with expressions of surprise. Clearly, mortals rarely inserted themselves into divine disagreements here. Several of the attendants looked positively scandalized. Dionysus let out a surprised laugh. Bold as well as powerful. The council meeting tomorrow will be entertaining indeed. He clapped his hands once, the sound somehow bringing order to the chaotic scene. Until then, Naruto Uzumaki may choose his own accommodations, provided he agrees to appear before the full divine council at noon tomorrow. Naruto considered this. A meeting would provide valuable information about this world, even if it meant subjecting himself to scrutiny. I'll be there, he agreed. Excellent. Dionysus seemed genuinely pleased. Now, I believe we have a festival to salvage. Let music and wine flow to celebrate this most unusual night. With surprising efficiency, guild workers began clearing debris while musicians cautiously returned to their positions. The resilient spirit of celebration gradually reasserted itself, though many eyes continued to track Naruto's movements. As the crowd dispersed, Hestia approached him again. My offer stands. My familia is small but genuine. We have a converted church not far from here with spare space. Before Naruto could respond, he felt a presence at his other side. Freya had somehow appeared there without him noticing her movement, a feat that impressed him given his heightened senses. Or, she offered in that musical voice, my tower provides accommodations suited to someone of your unique capabilities. Private rooms with every luxury, and scholars who might help you understand your transition to our world. Naruto looked between the two goddesses, one offering humble authenticity, the other luxurious resources, both with undisguised interest in him that extended beyond mere hospitality. Thank you both, he said diplomatically. But I think I need some time alone to process everything that's happened. Is there somewhere neutral I could stay tonight? Just until I understand this place better. A third voice entered the conversation. The white-haired boy who had been with Hestia earlier. The hostess of Fertility Inn has rooms for travelers. It's run by Mia Grand, who doesn't align with any particular deity. He stepped forward with a friendly smile, apparently less intimidated by the situation than most. I'm Bel Crenel, by the way. First member of Hestia Familia. Naruto returned the smile, sensing a kindred spirit in the younger man's straightforward demeanor. Nice to meet you, Bel. And thanks for the suggestion, that sounds perfect. Freya's expression cooled slightly, but she maintained her composure. As you wish. Until tomorrow, Then, she turned to leave, then paused to add over her shoulder, should you change your mind, my tower is always visible from anywhere in Orario. With that, she glided away, her attendants following in her wake. Hestia watched her go with narrowed eyes before turning back to Naruto. That one collects exceptional souls like trophies. Be careful, Naruto nodded. I've dealt with collectors before. His tone suggested these encounters hadn't ended well for the collectors in question. Hestia studied him with renewed interest. I believe you have. Belle can show you to the hostess of fertility. She produced a small token from her sleeve, a simple wooden disc carved with a flame symbol. If you need anything, show this. Most in Orario will recognize the emblem of the hearth. Naruto accepted the token with a respectful nod, sensing the genuine goodwill behind the gesture. Thank you, Lady Hestia. She brightened at the respectful address. Just Hestia is fine. Formality has never been my preference, unlike some gods. She glanced meaningfully in the direction Freya had departed. As Belle led Naruto toward the inn, the young adventurer couldn't contain his curiosity. Those techniques you used against the monsters, that wasn't magic like anything I've seen before. It's called ninjutsu where I come from, Naruto explained, finding comfort in discussing familiar concepts. A combination of physical and spiritual energy we call chakra. And those copies of yourself. Shadow clones. One of my specialties. Naruto refrained from mentioning just how many clones he could produce at full strength. No need to reveal all his capabilities just yet. Belle's eyes shone with undisguised admiration. Could you, maybe teach some of that? I mean, if you're staying in Orario for a while. The question caught Naruto off guard. In all the chaos, he hadn't had time to consider the implications of being trapped in another world. How long would he be here? Was there even a way back? Sasuke might be searching for him, but the nature of the jutsu failure made it impossible to predict the outcome. I'm not sure how long I'll be around, he admitted. Or if the techniques from my world even work the same way here. That fight felt different somehow. Belle nodded thoughtfully. The gods will probably have theories about that tomorrow. They've been in this world for 1,000 years. But they originally came from somewhere else too, the divine realm. This information piqued Naruto's interest. So transport between realms isn't unheard of here. It's rare, Belle qualified. And usually only possible for divine beings. The gods descended to our world because they were bored with immortality and wanted to experience mortal entertainment. At least, that's what Hestia-sama told me. Gods who descended to the mortal realm out of boredom. Naruto found the concept simultaneously absurd and disturbing. His world had its share of power-hungry deities. But they generally maintained distance from human affairs unless provoked. They turned down a side street where the festival damage hadn't reached. Lanterns still swayed merrily here, ND music played from an establishment ahead. A large, welcoming building with multiple stories and a sign depicting a smiling woman holding a mug. Here we are, Belle announced. The hostess of fertility. Best food in Orario. And Mia Grand runs a tight ship. No fighting allowed inside, god or mortal. Naruto appreciated the simple rule. Sounds perfect. As they approached the entrance, he sensed multiple skilled fighters inside. Their energy signatures distinct from civilians in a way that reminded him of the chakra difference between shinobi and ordinary citizens back home. Despite his fatigue, he remained alert. New worlds meant new threats, and he'd learned through harsh experience never to let his guard down completely. The door swung open before they reached it, and a tall, muscular woman with cat-like ears stood blocking the threshold, arms crossed over her chest. Her eyes narrowed as she took in Naruto's appearance. So, she said gruffly, you're the one who demolished half the festival plaza and killed a floor boss single-handed. It wasn't a question. Naruto rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly, a gesture from his youth that occasionally resurfaced. Sorry about that. The monsters didn't really give me a choice. To his surprise, the woman's stern expression cracked into a grin. Ha, anyone who can knock Freya and Hestia off balance in the same night is welcome at my table. She stepped aside, gesturing them in. I'm Mia Grand. First drinks on the house for the entertainment you provided. The interior was warm and inviting, filled with wooden tables and the appetizing aroma of cooking food. Despite the late hour and recent chaos, the establishment was busy with patrons who turned to stare as Naruto entered. Whispers immediately rippled through the room. Mia silenced them with a sharp clap. "Back to your drinks. Man's earned some peace after saving half your ungrateful hides." To Naruto, she added more quietly, "Upstairs, last door on the left. Clean room, good luck. Window with a clear escape route if needed. 50 valis per night, first night free for monster slayers." Her practicality and direct manner reminded Naruto of Tsunade in her better moods. "Appreciate it," he said sincerely. Bell hesitated at the entrance. "Will you be all right?" "I can. He'll be fine," Mia interrupted. "I suspect he's handled worse than curious drunks and gossip-hungry adventurers." She gave Naruto an appraising look. Though tomorrow's divine council, that might be another matter entirely. Naruto had faced down the literal embodiment of a primordial goddess, battled dimension-hopping aliens, and helped end a world war. How bad could a meeting with some local deities be? "I'll manage," he said confidently, offering Bell a reassuring smile. "Thanks for your help. Maybe we can talk more tomorrow after this council meeting." Bell nodded eagerly before departing, leaving Naruto to follow a waitress with similar cat-like features up to his room. The space was indeed clean and simple. A bed, a wash basin, a chair by the window overlooking the now subdued festival, and a small writing desk. For the first time since his arrival, Naruto had a moment of true privacy to process his situation. He sat on the edge of the bed and closed his eyes, focusing inward to the familiar landscape where he could communicate directly with his lifelong companion. "Kurama, how are you holding up?" Quote, the massive nine-tailed fox appeared in his mindscape, though the connection seemed hazier than usual, the borders of their shared consciousness less defined. "Something about this world is interfering with our connection," the fox rumbled, his voice carrying a note of concern Naruto rarely heard. "The energy here, it resonates differently. Not incompatible, but distinct from chakra as we understand it." "I noticed during the fight," Naruto agreed. "Sage mode worked, but it felt stronger yet less controlled. And your chakra seemed to react strangely with that dragon creature." Kurama nodded gravely. "That creature recognized your chakra signature, or rather, it recognized something in your chakra that felt familiar to it. I sensed a connection I don't understand yet. Any theories on how we got here? Or how to get back?" The fox's massive tail swayed thoughtfully. The jutsu was meant to bridge dimensions, but Sasuke designed it for controlled observation. Not transportation. Something interfered. Perhaps the same energy I'm sensing in this world. As for returning, he shook his massive head. "We need more information." Naruto sighed, opening his eyes to stare at the unfamiliar ceiling. "Then I guess we're meeting some gods tomorrow." Outside his window, the festival lights continued to twinkle, though with subdued enthusiasm after the night's chaos. In the distance, the impossibly tall tower Freya had mentioned dominated the skyline, its upper levels glowing with a soft silver light. From another direction, near what appeared to be a more modest district, a smaller but warmer light burned steadily, perhaps the converted church Hestia had mentioned. Between them stood Babel Tower and the sealed entrance to the dungeon, where monsters far stranger than those he'd fought tonight presumably waited. A new world with new rules, new powers, and new threats. Naruto Uzumaki, the seventh Hokage of a village no one here had heard of, found himself smiling despite everything. If there was one constant in his life across dimensions, it was this: when thrown into impossible situations, he somehow always found his way forward. "Well," he muttered to himself as fatigue finally began to claim him, "at least it won't be boring." In the darkness of her chamber atop her silver tower, Freya reclined on silken cushions, her eyes still seeing the impossible colors of the stranger's soul even with her eyelids closed. In thousands of years collecting beautiful souls, she had never encountered anything like it, the perfect balance of light and shadow, strength and compassion, with that strange dual nature that made it pulse like a living aurora. She wanted it, not just to observe or collect, but to understand. The hunger she felt wasn't her usual acquisitive desire but something deeper, more primal. Something she hadn't felt since before descending from the divine realm. "Naruto Uzumaki," she whispered his name like an incantation, tasting each syllable. "What a fascinating puzzle you present." Across the city in her modest church, Hestia paced before the hearth fire, her mind racing. The stranger's energy had felt like home somehow, warm and bright and fiercely protective, resonating with her own domain in ways she couldn't articulate. Something about him called to her most fundamental nature as goddess of home and hearth. "Belle," she said suddenly, startling her sleepy familia member, "we need to prepare for tomorrow. I need you to find everything you can about interdimensional travel, any old legends. Stories from before the gods descended, anything." Belle blinked sleepily. "Goddess, it's the middle of the night." "I know," she said, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "But I have AF. Ealing Naruto Uzumaki is going to need allies tomorrow. And I intend to be first among them." Deep beneath the city, in the partially collapsed upper level of the dungeon, something stirred. The energy released during Naruto's battle with the dragon had seeped into the walls, creating a resonance that traveled downward, awakening things that had slept for millennia. Ancient mechanisms hummed with renewed power, responding to the presence of chakra for the first time since the world's creation. In the deepest level, where even the bravest adventurers had never reached, a chamber sealed since. Before the gods, descent began to glow with symbols remarkably similar to those used in Naruto's world for sealing jutsu. The convergence had begun. Chapter 1 End Chapter 2, Neither God nor Mortal. Morning light spilled through the narrow window of Naruto's rented room, painting golden rectangles across the wooden floor. He had risen before dawn, body accustomed to the disciplined routines of a Hokage even in this foreign realm. Cross-legged on the floor, he maintained perfect stillness, eyes closed, gathering natural energy while carefully observing its differences from the chakra of his homeworld. "It's more volatile here," he murmured to Kurama within their shared mental space. Almost eager to be used. The great fox's presence stirred, his consciousness having spent the night analyzing their new environment. The energy has consciousness, not sapience, but something akin to instinct. It recognizes you as foreign yet compatible. Naruto extended his awareness outward, sensing the gradual awakening of Orario. The city's energy signatures varied wildly, some nearly identical to civilians from his world, others flaring with power closer to trained shinobi, and scattered throughout. Pinpoints of overwhelming energy that could only be the deities Belle had mentioned. A knock at his door interrupted his meditation. "Breakfast's ready, if you're wanting some before your meeting with the gods," called the gruff voice of Mia Grand. "And there's already a crowd gathering downstairs hoping to catch a glimpse of you." "Thank you," Naruto replied, rising fluidly to his feet. "I'll be down shortly." He washed quickly in the basin provided, examining his reflection in the small mirror mounted above it. The face that looked back at him was his own, yet subtly different. Whisker marks on his cheeks seemed more pronounced, his blue eyes occasionally flickering with an inner light when he channeled chakra. Even his physical form felt slightly altered, as though his Dai was adapting to this world's different energy. Dressing in his standard attire, black and orange reinforced clothing under his red sage cloak, Naruto centered himself before heading downstairs to face the inevitable curiosity. Fame was nothing new to him. After saving his village multiple times and becoming Hokage, he'd grown accustomed to attention. But being the object of fascination in an entirely different world presented unique challenges. The tavern fell silent as he descended the stairs, dozens of eyes tracking his movement. Adventurers of all descriptions filled the tables, humans alongside people with animal features. Tall elegant figures with pointed ears, and stout warriors whose beards reached their belts. Their equipment ranged from practical leather armor to elaborate mithril plate, and weapons of every conceivable design hung at their sides. Mia gestured to an empty table in the corner that offered both privacy and a clear view of all entrances, a tactical position Naruto immediately appreciated. As he crossed the room, whispers followed in his wake. Single-handedly defeated a floor boss. Created duplicates of himself without a spell chant. Not blessed by any deity. Both Freya and Hestia interested already. A cat-featured waitress, Chloe, according to her introduction, brought a plate heaped with unfamiliar foods, thick bread slices. Eggs prepared with spices he couldn't identify, and meat of unknown origin. His stomach growled appreciatively despite the strangeness. On the house, Chloe winked. Mia says anyone who causes that much trouble for the guild deserves at least one free meal. Naruto smiled his thanks, digging in with enthusiasm. Whatever differences existed between worlds, hunger remained a universal constant. The tavern door swung open, admitting Belle Crenelle along with two companions, a petite girl with chestnut hair and a taller woman whose most striking feature was a pair of green-tinted glasses that couldn't fully hide her sharp, analytical gaze. They navigated directly to Naruto's table. "Good morning," Belle greeted cheerfully. "I hope you slept well. These are my familia members, Lilyruka Art and Makoto Yamato." The smaller girl, clearly not human, with subtle features that reminded Naruto of the Tanuki back home, offered a formal bow. "Most call me Lily. Your battle prowess was most impressive, Uzumaki-san." The taller woman studied him with unconcealed curiosity. "Your fighting style, it resembles certain Eastern martial traditions, yet fundamentally different in execution." Naruto gestured for them to join him. "Just Naruto is fine. And yes, my techniques would be familiar in concept but different in application from anything you've seen." He leaned forward slightly. "What can you tell me about this council meeting today?" Belle exchanged glances with his companions before answering. "The guild has been preparing the grand chamber since dawn. Every major deity in Orario has confirmed attendance." "Unprecedented," Makoto added. "Typically, only emergency situations involving dungeon outbreaks or threats to multiple familias warrant full assembly." Lily nodded solemnly. Lily overheard guild officials saying the council will begin with a status assessment, followed by questioning of the anomaly. Her eyes flicked to Naruto apologetically. Their terminology, not Lily's. Naruto absorbed this without offense. "I'm used to being called worse. What exactly is this guild, and what authority do they have over these gods?" The three exchanged another glance, this one containing unmistakable amusement. "The guild doesn't have authority over deities," Belle explained. "No mortal institution does. The gods agreed to certain limitations voluntarily when they NDED to our world, primarily restrictions on directly using their divine powers. The guild merely administers the practical aspects of dungeon exploration and monster management. Think of it as a mutually beneficial arrangement." Makoto elaborated. "Gods gain entertainment from mortal achievements, mortals receive divine blessings that enhance their capabilities, and the guild ensures the system functions without collapsing into chaos." "And what's this Falna I keep hearing mentioned?" Naruto asked between bites of the surprisingly delicious breakfast. Lily's eyes widened. "You truly are from another world if you don't know about the Falna system." She turned, lifting the back of her shirt slightly to reveal intricate markings etched directly into her skin. "This is a god's blessing. Their divine grace transformed into quantifiable abilities. No mortal in our world can perform significant magic or achieve superhuman feats without a deity's blessing. Which makes your abilities particularly interesting," Belle added, leaning forward eagerly. "You fought like someone with an advanced Falna, but Hestia-sama confirmed you don't have one at all." Naruto considered how to explain chakra in terms they might understand. "Where I come from, power isn't granted by deities. It's developed through training and proper technique to harness energies that exist within and around us." He paused, searching for the right words. "Imagine if everyone had the potential to create their own blessing from within, with the right knowledge and practice." The concept clearly fascinated Belle. Ho's red eyes shone with undisguised admiration. Could anyone learn these techniques? Theoretically, Naruto began cautiously, but the tavern door burst open, interrupting their conversation. A tall figure in elaborate guild livery stood framed in the doorway, his perfectly pressed uniform and immaculate posture conveying authority even before he spoke. "Naruto Uzumaki," he announced formally. "The Council of Deities awaits your presence." A collective intake of breath swept through the tavern. Guild escorts were common enough, but the formal announcement suggested a summoning rather than an invitation. Naruto finished his last bite unhurriedly, then rose to his feet. "Guess that's my cue." To Belle and his companions, he added more quietly, "Thanks for the information. I have a feeling I'll need all the context I can get." Belle stood as well. "We'll be at the council too. Hestia-sama requested our presence." "Smart goddess," Naruto commented with a small smile. The guild official led Naruto through Orario's morning bustle, their path taking them directly toward Babel Tower, which looked even more imposing in daylight. Unlike the previous night's chaos, today the streets had been meticulously cleared of festival debris, with only scorch marks and cracked pavement remaining as evidence of the battle. Citizens stopped to stare as they passed, some bowing respectfully while others backed away cautiously. Word of the stranger's abilities had clearly spread overnight, transformed by rumor into a reputation that preceded him. Naruto maintained a relaxed but vigilant posture, cataloging defensive positions and escape routes by habit while projecting an approachable demeanor. "Your arrival has caused quite the commotion," the guild official remarked stiffly. "The last interdimensional incident occurred over 3 centuries ago, and that visitor was less conspicuous in their abilities." Naruto raised an eyebrow. "So I'm not the first traveler between worlds to end up here?" "Hardly," the man replied, "though most arrive by divine intervention rather than independent means. The gods occasionally bring favored individuals from other realms when they find someone particularly entertaining." His tone carried unmistakable disapproval of such divine whims. "I didn't exactly choose to come here," Naruto clarified. "A jutsu, a technique, went wrong during testing." The official's stride faltered momentarily. "Fascinating. A mortal-created method of interdimensional travel. The research division will be most interested in documenting your process." EY arrived at Babel Tower's imposing entrance, where massive doors carved with scenes of adventurers battling monsters swung open silently at their approach. The interior revealed a bustling commercial district entirely contained within the tower's base. Shops selling weapons, armor, potions, and provisions lined circular hallways that radiated outward from a central plaza. "The guild headquarters occupies the tower's midsection," the official explained, leading Naruto toward an ornate elevator mechanism. "The council chamber is on the 50th floor." As they ascended, Naruto focused on his breathing, centering himself for the upcoming meeting. Meeting with councils of powerful figures was familiar territory for a Hokage, but the politics of deities would undoubtedly follow different rules than those of hidden villages. He would need to be careful not to make unnecessary enemies while still maintaining his independence. The elevator doors opened onto a corridor of polished marble, walls adorned with paintings depicting deities bestowing blessings upon kneeling mortals. 2 armored guards flanked massive double doors at the corridor's end, their weapons and armor of such exceptional quality that Naruto immediately identified them as elite fighters despite their ceremonial positioning. The doors swung inward, revealing a vast circular chamber dominated by tiered seating that rose around a central platform. Hundreds of figures occupied these seats, some in elaborate ceremonial attire that screamed deity, others in more practical clothing that marked them as high-ranking adventurers or familia representatives. "Approach the center and wait to be addressed," the guild official instructed before peeling away to take his own position at a scribe's desk. Naruto walked forward with measured confidence, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. He felt dozens of divine gazes assessing him, their power barely contained within mortal forms. Taking his position on the central platform, he stood relaxed but dignified, meeting the evaluating stares with calm self-assurance. An elderly man with a beard that reached his knees and eyes that swirled with cosmic patterns stood from the highest tier. "The Council of Deities is now in session," he announced, his voice carrying without apparent effort. "I, Odin, preside as senior council member. We gather to address the anomaly that has entered our realm, the mortal who wields power without divine blessing." Odin gestured toward Naruto with a gnarled staff. "Identify yourself and your origin for the assembled council." Naruto squared his shoulders, projecting his voice clearly as he had done countless times when addressing the allied shinobi forces. "I am Naruto Uzumaki, 7th Hokage of Konohagakure, the village hidden in the leaves. From the realm of the elemental nations." His straightforward introduction caused immediate murmuring among the assembled deities. Clearly, his world was unknown to them. "Explain your presence in our realm," Odin continued once the whispers subsided. "By what means did you pierce the veil between worlds?" "Not intentionally," Naruto replied honestly. "A space-time jutsu, a technique for observing other dimensions, experienced an unexpected resonance. I was pulled through rather than merely observing." A slender woman with silver blue hair and eyes like frozen lakes rose from her seat. "What power source fuels these jutsu you speak of?" "All magic requires divine spark or spirit essence. In my world, we use chakra, the combined energy of physical strength and spiritual power that exists within all living beings," Naruto explained. With training and discipline, this energy can be molded for various techniques. No divine blessing required. This state NT caused considerably more than whispers, outright exclamations and heated discussions erupted across the chamber. The concept clearly challenged fundamental assumptions about power in their world. Odin raised his staff, restoring order with a single thunderous tap against the floor. You claim all mortals in your realm can perform such feats. All have the potential, Naruto clarified. Not all develop it to the same degree. Just as some might have greater natural strength or intelligence, some have greater chakra reserves or control. From a lower tier, Hestia stood, her small stature lying the ancient power Naruto now sensed more clearly in daylight. Honorable Council, I witnessed this man's abilities firsthand during last night's incident. His power, while extraordinary, appears to function within natural laws, simply not the same natural laws that govern our world. Natural laws can be bent by divine will, countered a muscular god with a perfectly trimmed beard and armor that gleamed with inner light. Perhaps he simply does not recognize the divine source of his power. Naruto shook his head firmly. With respect, my abilities aren't divine in origin. The Sage of X paths originally taught humans to use chakra, but the ability itself comes from within each individual. This sage you mention, Freya interjected smoothly from her position near Odin, was he not a divine figure in your realm? He had divine ancestry, Naruto acknowledged, but the techniques he taught were designed specifically for mortals to use through their own efforts. A new figure rose, a woman of breathtaking beauty with auburn hair and eyes the silver green of moonlight on forest leaves. Her simple white chitin contrasted with the elaborate attire of most deities, yet something about her presence commanded attention instantly. A silver bow was slung across her back, and a crescent moon symbol adorned her brow. I would like to examine the nature of this energy myself, he declared in a voice that carried the whisper of wind through ancient trees. If council permits. Odin inclined his head. Artemis, your domain of wilderness and the hunt makes you uniquely suited to assess natural energies. Approach. The goddess descended gracefully from her tier to the central platform, moving with the fluid precision of a perfect predator. Up close, Naruto noted details invisible from a distance. Her eyes contained flecks of gold that seemed to shift like dappled sunlight through canopy leaves, and her skin bore nearly invisible markings reminiscent of forest patterns. May I? She asked, extending her hand's palm up toward him. Naruto nodded, remaining still as she placed her palms just inches from his chest without touching him. Her eyes closed in concentration, and he felt a gentle probing, not invasive but investigative, like cool forest air seeking paths through dense undergrowth. Extraordinary, she murmured after several moments. Her eyes opened, now glowing softly with internalized power. His energy is indeed self-generated, yet it resonates with natural forces in a way I've never encountered. It's as though, she paused, searching for the right words. As though he's achieved harmony with nature's essence without divine intervention. A partnership rather than domination or supplication. She stepped back, addressing the council while maintaining proximity to Naruto. There is also a second energy source within him, ancient, powerful, and distinctly separate from his own. Something akin to a bound spirit, yet fully integrated with his being. Naruto felt Kurama stir within him, the fox's consciousness rising closer to the surface in response to being detected. The nine-tailed fox, he explained. In my world, tailed beasts are entities of pure chakra. Kurama and I are partners. This revelation caused another stir among the deities, some leaning forward with increased interest, others drawing back with expressions of concern. A spirit of such magnitude, willingly bound to a mortal, questioned a deity whose body seemed partially composed of flowing water. Impossible without divine compulsion. Not bound, Naruto corrected firmly. Allied. We choose to work together out of mutual respect and friendship. Freya's silver eyes narrowed thoughtfully. That explains the dual nature of your soul's appearance, she murmured, almost to herself. Odin stroked his beard contemplatively. We face an unprecedented situation. A mortal wielding power independently of divine blessing, carrying within him a spirit entity of significant strength. Arriving through dimensional boundaries without divine facilitation. He addressed the assembly. The matter before us is clear. How shall we proceed with this anomaly in our realm? A deity with golden skin and eyes like blazing suns stood. The solution is simple. He must receive a Falna to regularize his position in our world. His unusual abilities would make him a valuable addition to any familia. And which god would you suggest bestow this blessing? Challenged a goddess wrapped in flowing shadows. Would you volunteer your Falna, Apollo? Or perhaps you believe why? Our divine essence compatible with his unusual energy? Apollo smiled diplomatically. I merely suggest normalization through established protocols. Perhaps a demonstration would settle the matter. Odin considered this, then nodded. A reasonable proposal. Naruto Uzumaki, would you consent to an attempt to receive divine blessing? This would help us understand how your chakra interacts with our world's fundamental systems. Naruto hesitated, glancing toward Hestia, whose slight headshake confirmed his instinctive wariness. I'm willing to participate in experiments that might help understand my situation, he said carefully. But I'd prefer not to rush into permanent alterations to my being. A sensible precaution, Artemis commented, still standing nearby. His energy system is complex and likely incompatible with standard Falna protocols. Nevertheless, an attempt should be made under controlled circumstances, Odin decided. Which deity volunteers for this experiment? Mult. IPLE hands raised immediately, Apollo's golden arm extended highest, but Freya's elegant gesture and Hestia's determined thrust upward came nearly simultaneously. Several other deities indicated interest as well, their gazes fixed on Naruto with varying expressions of curiosity, acquisitiveness, or scientific detachment. Given the potential danger, Artemis interjected before Odin could choose. Perhaps multiple approaches should be tested. I volunteer to attempt a partial blessing, not a full Falna, but a hunter's mark that might illuminate compatibility issues. Odin nodded thoughtfully. Wisdom in caution. Very well. Artemis shall attempt a partial blessing, followed by attempts from. He surveyed the volunteers, his ancient eyes assessing motivations more than capabilities. Hestia, whose hearth blessing carries minimal risk of adverse reaction, and Freya, whose domain of love encompasses understanding of souls. The chosen goddesses nodded their acceptance, though Freya's perfy court features betrayed a flicker of displeasure at being equalized with lesser deities in the selection. Prepare the testing chamber, Odin instructed attendants who immediately moved to carry out the order. To Naruto, he added, these proceedings will continue after experimental results are obtained. Until then, this council stands in recess. The assembled deities rose in a rustle of fabrics and soft murmurs. Many casting lingering glances at Naruto before departing through various exits. Only the three selected goddesses remained, approaching the central platform with distinctly different expressions, Hestia with friendly concern, Artemis with scientific curiosity, and Freya with barely concealed anticipation. Well, Naruto commented dryly as the massive chamber emptied, that went about as expected. Hestia reached him first, her small stature requiring her to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You handled yourself well. Gods appreciate directness, even when they disagree with what's being said directly. The testing chamber is prepared, honored deities, announced a guild official from a side entrance. If you would follow me. The small group proceeded down a corridor, lined with ancient symbols that reminded Naruto of sealing jutsu, concentric patterns designed to contain and direct energy. The room they entered confirmed this impression, a perfect circle inscribed with interconnected runes, illuminated by crystals that pulsed with stored magical energy. This chamber was designed for divine experimentation, Hestia explained quietly as they entered. The barriers prevent energy feedback loops that might damage the tower. Or the city, Artemis added matter-of-factly. Divine power interacting unpredictably with unfamiliar energy sources has, historically produced explosive results. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Comforting. The process is simple, Freya explained, her melodic voice drawing his attention effortlessly. A god's blood carries divine essence which, when applied to a mortal's back, creates the foundation for a Falna, a blessing that grows as the recipient achieves worthy accomplishments. Each Falna reflects both the deity's domain and the mortal's inherent nature. Artemis continued, removing her bow and placing it carefully against the wall. A hunter blessed by a hearth goddess still receives growth in hunting skills, but perhaps with emphasis on protection rather than predation. Hestia nodded. And the mortal's natural talents influence how the blessing manifests. Bel's exceptional desire for growth caused his Falna to develop uniquely, for instance. So it's a partnership, Naruto observed, not just a gift from above. Precisely, Hestia confirmed with a pleased smile. Though some gods prefer their children not to think of it that way. Freya's perfect lips curved slightly. Different divine philosophies. Some gods prefer supplication, others partnership. The results speak for themselves. Her Our eyes flicked meaningfully toward Hestia, whose familia was notably smaller than her own. We'll proceed in ascending order of potential impact, Artemis decided, stepping forward. My hunter's mark is temporary and specific in purpose. Remove your upper garments and kneel, facing away from me. Naruto complied, shrugging off his cloak and shirt to reveal a torso marked with scars from countless battles. The most prominent, a starburst pattern over his heart, drew Hestia's concerned gaze. Old wound, he explained simply. Healed long ago. Artemis positioned herself behind him, producing a small silver knife from her belt. With practiced precision, she pricked her finger, allowing a single drop of golden ichor, divine blood, to well up. My blessing seeks those with affinity for nature's harmony, she explained. It identifies pathways of connection between mortal essence and natural energy. If compatible, it manifests as heightened senses and terrain affinity rather than increased parameters. She touched the golden droplet to the center of Naruto's back, between his shoulder blades. Immediately, light spread outward from the contact point, forming delicate patterns resembling branching trees and flowing water. Unlike typical Falna patterns, these seemed to hover just above his skin rather than embedding within it. Fascinating, Artemis murmured. Your body recognizes the blessing concept but redirects its implementation. The energy flows along existing pathways rather than creating new ones. Naruto closed his eyes, focusing on the sensation. It feels similar to entering sage mode, but externally initiated rather than drawn in consciously. Try activating your natural energy technique, Artemis suggested. I want to see the interaction. Naruto nodded, remaining kneeling as he gathered natural energy, carefully balancing it with his physical and spiritual energies. The familiar orange pigmentation formed around his eyes, which transformed to their like sage mode appearance when he opened them. The reaction was immediate and unexpected. Artemis's temporary blessing patterns flared brilliantly, expanding across his entire back before suddenly inverting. Instead of divine energy flowing into him, the natural energy he had gathered seemed to flow outward, creating a feedback loop that caused the goddess to gasp and step backward. Impossible, she whispered, her eyes wide. You're channeling energy back through the blessing circuit. The pattern stabilized after a moment, neither fully accepting the divine blessing nor rejecting it, instead reaching a curious equilibrium where both energies coexisted without merging. Well, that's new, Naruto commented, carefully releasing sage mode. The blessing patterns dimmed but remained visible, as faint silver tracery across his skin. Artemis circled to face him, her expression transformed from scientific detachment to genuine wonder. Your sage mode directly taps the world's essence in its purest form, something I've only seen gods accomplish. She knelt to examine him at eye level. In all my millennia observing mortals connect with nature, I've never witnessed such perfect integration. Her silver-green eyes studied him with new interest. You truly are a sage, not merely in title but in essence. My turn, Hestia declared, stepping forward as Artemis reluctantly moved aside. The hearth goddess produced a small ceremonial pin, pricking her finger with practiced ease. Her divine ichor appeared as rich crimson rather than Artemis's gold. My blessing centers on protection, community, and nurturing strength, she explained. It typically manifests most strongly in those who value family bonds and home. She pressed her blood-tipped finger to the same spot Artemis had used. Her divine energy flowing into the existing patterns. Instead of overriding them, however, her blessing seemed to complement the hunter's mark, adding intricate whorls reminiscent of hearth flames between the existing branches. Oh, she exclaimed in surprise. They're harmonizing instead of competing. The combined pattern pulsed with merged energy, silver green from Artemis and warm red orange from Hestia, creating a balanced design that seemed to breathe with Naruto's own rhythm. I can feel both, he confirmed, the sensation unlike anything he'd experienced. They're distinct but not conflicting. Freya watched with undisguised fascination. Multiple compatible blessings without status conflict, unprecedented. She glided forward, producing an ornate silver blade that seemed to capture and reflect light from impossible angles. Let us complete the experiment. Her divine blood appeared almost luminescent, shimmering with opalescent colors as it beaded on her perfect fingertip. With deliberate grace, she placed it against Naruto's back, completing a triangle with the previous application points. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Where the previous blessings had found harmony, Freya's power surged through the established patterns like lightning through water. The runes around the chamber flared to life, absorbing excess energy that spilled from the connection point. Naruto felt Kurama's chakra respond instinctively, rising to protect him from what it perceived as invasion. The competing energies created visible manifestation, a translucent orange-red shroud beginning to form around his body. Fascinating, Freya exclaimed, undeterred by the potentially dangerous reaction. The spirit entity defends against perceived domination. Freya, disengage, Artemis warned sharply. This is approaching containment threshold. The silver-haired goddess ignored the warning, pressing her palm fully against Naruto's back. Show me what you truly are, she whispered, her divine power surging forward. Naruto's eyes flashed crimson as Kurama's influence strengthened in response. That's enough, he stated firmly, his voice overlaid with the fox's deeper resonance. With practiced control, he dispersed the forming chakra cloak while simultaneously channeling enough of Kurama's energy to break the connection without harming the goddess. The resulting energy pulse knocked Freya backward several steps, not violently, but with unmistakable rejection of her attempt to push deeper. The chamber's runes flared once more before settling back to their dormant state. Silence fell as the energies dissipated. The combined blessing pattern remained visible on Naruto's back, but Freya's contribution appeared distinctly separate, a silvery crescent that curved along his right shoulder blade. Beautiful but clearly not integrated with the harmonious central design. Well, Hestia broke the silence, unable to entirely suppress her satisfaction at Freya's rebuff. I believe that conclusively demonstrates compatibility variations. Freya recovered her composure instantly, her perfect features revealing nothing but scientific interest. Indeed, his energy system accepts influence but resists dominance. Far from being offended, she seemed even more intrigued. A soul that cannot be collected through standard means, how refreshingly novel. Artemis approached Naruto again, examining the stabilized pattern on his back. The blessings have taken partial effect, not a true Falna, but something new. A recognition marker rather than a subordination bond. Naruto rolled his shoulders experimentally, feeling the unfamiliar energy settling into equilibrium with his chakra network. What does that mean practically? You remain independent, Hestia explained, not bound to any familia, yet carrying a connection to divine domains that might facilitate magic use in our world. Or at minimum, provide recognition that you operate with divine acknowledgement if not subordination. Artemis added, useful for interactions with guild officials and other familias. A guild attendant appeared at the doorway. The council has reconvened to hear results. Your presence is requested. Naruto retrieved his shirt and cloak, the blessing patterns fading from visibility as fabric covered them, though he could still feel their presence like a gentle warmth against his skin. The return to the council chamber proceeded in thoughtful silence, each deity clearly processing the implications of what they'd witnessed. When they reached the chamber, they found it significantly less crowded. Only the highest-ranking gods remained, with Odin presiding from his elevated position. Report your findings, the ancient deity commanded once they had taken their places. Artemis stepped forward as the experiment's initiator. The subject's energy system, this chakra network, interfaces with divine blessing in unprecedented ways. Rather than accepting subordination through Falna, it establishes resonance relationships based on natural compatibility. She gestured toward Naruto. My hunter's mark and Hestia's hearth blessing achieved harmonious coexistence without hierarchy. While Freya's more dominant approach was partially accepted but maintained separation. In practical terms, Freya interjected smoothly, he cannot be fully incorporated into a single familia through standard means. His independence appears to be an intrinsic quality of his being. Odin's cosmic eyes studied Naruto with renewed interest. A mortal who stands outside our established order by his very nature. Troubling or fascinating, depending on one's perspective. He tapped his staff thoughtfully against the floor. The question becomes one of placement within our society while you remain in our realm. If I may, Hestia spoke up, her diminutive form somehow commanding attention despite her size. Tradition holds that visitors from other realms fall under the protection of the deity whose domain most closely aligns with their nature. As demonstrated by our experiment, Naruto shows strong affinity with both hearth and wilderness aspects. Convenient that those happen to be your domain and Artemis's, commented Apollo with a knowing smile. The resonance patterns don't lie, Artemis countered calmly. His sage mode directly interfaces with the natural world in ways that align with my domain's fundamental principles. And his protective instincts and community-building nature align with the hearth, Hestia added. His first action upon arriving as defending civilians rather than seeking advantage. Odin raised a hand to halt the developing debate. Joint patronage has precedent in unusual cases. Artemis and Hestia may share responsibility or orienting the visitor to our world's customs and limitations. His gaze shifted to Freya, who had remained uncharacteristically silent. You make no claim despite your obvious interest. A smile curved Freya's perfect lips. Some treasures are more satisfying when acquired through subtlety rather than declaration. Her silver eyes flickered to Naruto. I recognize potential alignment with my domain as well. But I'll allow it to develop, naturally. Something in her tone made several deities shift uncomfortably. Freya's definition of natural development had historically involved elaborate schemes spanning decades. Then it is decided, Odin declared. Naruto Uzumaki shall be recognized as a sage under joint patronage, neither fully mortal nor divine by our world's standards, but a knowledge as operating under provisional divine recognition. He fixed Naruto with his ancient gaze. You will be permitted relative freedom within Orario, provided you adhere to our most critical laws, primarily the prohibition against using divine powers to harm gods and the restriction against unauthorized dungeon exploitation. Since my abilities aren't divine in origin, the first shouldn't be an issue. Naruto replied respectfully. As for the dungeon, I have no intention of causing problems there. My priority is understanding how I arrived here and whether return to my world is possible. The research division will assist with interdimensional questions, Odin nodded. Coordinate through your patron goddesses. With a final tap of his staff, he concluded, this council is adjourned. May your presence bring interesting developments rather than troublesome ones, sage of another world. The assembled deities began dispersing, many casting final evaluating glances at Naruto before departing. Soon, only Hestia, Artemis, and a lingering Freya remained with him in the vast chamber. Well, Naruto sighed, rolling his shoulders where the blessing patterns still tingled faintly, that could have gone worse. Hestia snorted inelegantly. Typical divine politics. They're all terrified and fascinated in equal measure by someone who operates outside their system of control. Quote, control is an illusion even gods cherish, Freya commented, her voice carrying perfectly despite its soft volume. Your presence disrupts that illusion most beautifully. With a graceful inclination her head that somehow conveyed both acknowledgement and promise, she glided from the chamber. Once she had departed, Artemis approached Naruto with purposeful strides. We should test the practical effects of the blessing markers immediately. The dungeon's lower floors would provide appropriate challenges. Absolutely not, Hestia countered immediately. He's barely been in our world a day. There's no need to rush into danger. Artemis raised a silver-green eyebrow. His performance against the floor boss suggests danger is relative in his case. Besides, understanding how his abilities connection here is crucial information, both for him and for us as his patrons. Their disagreement, while professional in tone, carried undercurrents of deeper philosophical differences that Naruto recognized from countless similar discussions between village elders and military leaders. How about a compromise? He suggested diplomatically. I could use some practical exploration to understand this world better. But jumping into the deepest parts of your dungeon without preparation would be foolish even by my admittedly flexible standards. Both goddesses turned to him expectantly. What if we start with something moderate, whatever your equivalent of AB rank mission might be? Something challenging enough to test interactions between my abilities and this world's systems without risking catastrophic failure if something goes wrong. Hestia brightened. That's actually quite sensible. The middle floors would provide adequate testing grounds without excessive risk. Upper middle, Artemis specified, her expression suggesting this was still a significant concession from her perspective. Floor 15 has sufficient monster variety without venturing into truly dangerous territory. Perfect, Naruto agreed. When do we start? First, you need proper equipment, Hestia insisted. Your clothing may have protective properties in your world, but our monsters have specific vulnerabilities and resistances that specialized gear addresses. Artemis nodded in rare agreement. And you'll need registration with the guild if you plan to enter the dungeon officially. Without familia status, you'll require special classification, which means paperwork, Hestia concluded with a grimace. Lots of paperwork. Some things are universal across dimensions, Naruto commented with a wry smile. Thinking of the administrative nightmares that had consumed much of his time as Hokage. They exited the council chamber together, descending toward the guild's administrative offices several floors below. As they walked, Naruto felt a strange sensation, a momentary disorientation followed by a flash of familiar chakra that dissipated before he could identify its source. Something wrong? Artemis asked, noticing his sudden alertness. Not sure, he replied slowly. For a second, I thought I sensed. He shook his head, probably just adjusting to this world's energy patterns. Hestia and Artemis exchanged concerned glances but didn't press the issue as they continued downward. Unknown to the trio, deep within the dungeon's 30th floor, a ripple of energy pulsed through crystalline walls, causing monsters to retreat in uncharacteristic caution. Where the energy concentrated most strongly, the air itself seemed to warp momentarily before settling back to apparent normalcy. But things were no longer normal. Something had responded to Naruto's presence in this world, something ancient and patient that had waited millennia for the return of energy it recognized. The convergence was strengthening. The guild's administrative headquarters occupied 3 full floors of Babel Tower, a labyrinth of offices, record repositories, and research facilities that aged every aspect of dungeon exploration and monster management throughout Orario. Naruto followed his divine patrons through increasingly secure checkpoints until they reached a private office where a bespectacled half-elf waited with a towering stack of documents. Sage Uzumaki, she greeted formally, I am Aina Tool, Senior Guild Advisor and Special Case Administrator. Please be seated. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of paperwork, explanations, and negotiations as Naruto's unique status was formalized within the guild's rigid bureaucratic framework. Terms like independent contractor, special classification adventurer, and extra-dimensional consultant were proposed and rejected until they settled on recognized sage under joint patronage, a designation created specifically for his situation. This authorizes you to enter the dungeon to floor 20 without additional approval, Aina explained, stamping a final document with official guild seals. Beyond that requires escort by first-class adventurers or divine presence. Dungeon-harvested items and monster crystals must be exchanged through standard guild protocols, and 50% of all proceeds will be held in escrow pending permanent residency determination. Seems fair, Naruto agreed, signing where indicated. The guild's caution made perfect sense from a security perspective. His abilities were largely unknown variables in their carefully balanced system. Now for equipment, Hestia declared once the administrative gauntlet was complete. She led them to a specialized outfitting shop within Babel's commercial district, where craftsmen created custom gear for high-ranking adventurers. A grizzled dwarf with arms like tree trunks greeted them with gruff respect. Lady Hestia, Lady Artemis. This he interdimensional troublemaker everyone's talking about. Goibniu, Artemis acknowledged with a nod. We need exploration gear suitable for floor 15 assessment. His fighting style prioritizes mobility and direct energy projection. Quote, the dwarf circled Naruto with evaluating eyes. Unusual build. Dense muscle mass but leaner than typical frontliners. Hand positioning suggests primarily unarmed combat with supplementary weapons. He raised questioning eyebrows. Primarily ninjutsu and taijutsu, Naruto confirmed. Occasional kunai or shuriken, but I rarely use conventional weapons. Ninja, Goibniu stroked his beard thoughtfully. Worked with a few Eastern adventurers with similar requirements. Let's start with basics. Reinforced under armor with monster hair weave for elemental resistance. Lightweight vambraces with deflection enchantment, and utility belt with custom pouches. The next hour transformed into an unexpectedly enjoyable exploration of this world's crafting capabilities. Naruto tested materials for flexibility and durability while explaining the functionality he needed. Goibniu proved both knowledgeable and innovative, suggesting adaptations based on Orario's monster types. The Hellhound on floor 15 spits fire that sticks to conventional fabrics, he explained while presenting a dark orange material that resembled standard shinobi cloth but felt impossibly light. This is salamander wool treated with undine tears, repels flames while maintaining breathability. By the end, Naruto had acquired reinforced armor components that integrated seamlessly with his existing outfit. Enhanced weapon holsters, and specialized pouches for the potions that apparently substituted for medical ninjutsu in this world. Final touch, Goibniu announced, presenting a crimson cloak similar to Naruto's sage cloak but with subtle differences. Bloodsaurus hide from floor 40, treated with alchemical preservatives and reinforced with mithril thread. Me appearance as your current cloak but significantly enhanced protection. Naruto accepted it with genuine appreciation. Impressive craftsmanship. Basic necessities, the dwarf dismissed gruffly. Though his expression betrayed pride at the compliment. Come back after you've properly tested their limits, and we'll talk about real equipment. With preparations complete, they exited into the late afternoon sunlight. The day had passed quickly between the council meeting, administrative procedures, and equipment outfitting. We should postpone the dungeon expedition until tomorrow, Hestia suggested. Starting fresh after proper rest would be prudent. Artemis nodded reluctantly. Logical, if disappointingly cautious. I'll assemble a suitable escort party from my familia for morning departure. And you'll stay at my familia home tonight, Hestia declared with a tone that brooked no argument. As your joint patron, it's only appropriate I provide proper accommodations. Naruto recognized the protective instinct behind her insistence, the same maternal quality he'd observed in Tsunade despite her outward toughness. I appreciate the offer, he accepted graciously. Artemis excused herself to make preparations, agreeing to meet them at the dungeon entrance at dawn, while Hestia led Naruto through Orario's winding streets toward the converted church she had mentioned the previous night. You handled yourself well with the council, she commented as they walked. Many mortals become intimidated or sycophantic when addressing multiple deities. Naruto smiled slightly. I've faced down beings that called themselves gods before. Some deserved the title, others just had the power without the wisdom. Either way, respect without subservience usually works best. Hestia studied him with renewed interest. You're older than you appear, aren't you? Not in years perhaps, but in experience. I've lived through a war that nearly ended my world, he acknowledged quietly. That ages a person differently than years alone. She nodded understanding. Many gods forget what it means to truly risk everything for others. Immortality breeds a certain detachment from consequence. After a thoughtful pause, she added, that's partly why I was drawn to Bell. He possesses a hero's heart without a hero's cynicism. A rare combination. The will of fire, Naruto murmured. Pardon, something my predecessors called it. The drive to protect others even at personal cost. The best shinobi carried it regardless of their actual abilities. He smiled at a distant memory. My sensei was never the strongest or the most talented, but he understood that principle better than anyone. They turned down a quiet side street where a modest church stood, its stained glass windows repaired with mismatched colors and its bell tower slightly crooked, yet somehow more welcoming than many grander structures they had passed. It's not much, Hestia said with a hint of defensiveness, but it's home. It has character, Naruto replied sincerely. After years of official Hokage residence, he found himself appreciating the authentic charm of the obviously well-loved building. Inside, they found Bell and Lily preparing dinner while Makoto studied maps spread across a table. All three looked up as they entered, Bell's expression brightening immediately. Welcome back. How did the council meeting go? About as well as could be expected, Hestia replied, settling onto a cushioned bench with a weary sigh. Naruto is now officially recognized as a sage under joint tronage. Shared between myself and Artemis. Joint patronage. Makoto repeated with raised eyebrows. That's extremely unusual. The gods typically detest sharing influence. Everything about this situation is unusual. Hestia pointed out. And tomorrow will be even more so when we test how his abilities interact with the dungeon's middle floors. Bell nearly dropped the pot he was stirring. You're going into the dungeon tomorrow. Can I join the expedition? I expected nothing less. Hestia smiled indulgently. Artemis is arranging additional support from her hunters, but having my familia present is important for balance. Dinner proved to be a surprisingly comfortable affair, with conversation flowing naturally between explanations of Orario's customs and Naruto's carefully edited stories of his home world. He avoided classified information out of ingrained habit but shared enough about shinobi life to satisfy their curiosity. So every child in your world can learn these techniques? Lily asked, fascinated by the concept of chakra. They have the potential, Naruto clarified, though aptitude varies widely. Academy training begins with basic chakra control exercises, learning to access and direct your internal energy before attempting actual jutsu. Could someone from our world learn it? Bell asked, the question Naruto had been expecting since their first conversation. Theoretically, he replied thoughtfully, the principles should be universal if the energy exists here, but your Falna system might complicate things. It seems to channel power differently than chakra networks. Bell nodded, clearly filing this information away for future consideration. The dungeon tomorrow should provide valuable information about compatibility. Monsters respond differently to various energy types. After dinner, Makoto presented detailed maps of the dungeon floors they would be exploring, explaining monster populations and environmental hazards with a tactician precision. Naruto appreciated her thoroughness, recognizing a kindred strategic mind beneath her quiet demeanor. As evening deepened, Bell showed Naruto to a small but clean room in the church's former rectory. It's not luxurious, he apologized, but it's private and secure. Perfect, Naruto assured him. I've slept in far worse conditions on missions. Once alone, Naruto seated himself cross-legged on the floor, entering a meditative state to commune with Kurama. Their shared mindscape seemed clearer than the previous night, the fox's massive form more distinctly visible against the backdrop of swirling energy. The blessing markers those goddesses placed are still active, Kurama observed without preamble. They've integrated with your chakra pathways in a limited fashion. Any negative effects? The fox considered this, not immediately detrimental, but they create resonance points where this world's energy interfaces with your chakra system. Potentially useful for adaptation, potentially vulnerabilities if exploited by someone knowledgeable. Naruto nodded understanding. I felt something earlier, a familiar chakra signature that vanished before I could identify it. Could someone else from our world have come through? Possible, Kurama rumbled. The disruption that brought us here might have affected multiple locations. Or, the fox hesitated uncharacteristically. What? This world's energy contains patterns I find disturbingly familiar. Ancient patterns that predate human civilization in our world. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Kagaya level familiar. Similar frequency but different signature, Kurama clarified. Like distant relations rather than direct equivalents. Tomorrow's exploration may provide better insights if we can analyze the dungeon's energy at its source. With that unsettling thought, Naruto concluded his meditation and prepared for sleep. Despite the comfortable bed, rest came fitfully, his dreams filled with fragmented images, a massive tree with roots spanning worlds, crimson eyes watching from darkness, and a woman with sun-bright hair reaching toward him across an impossible distance. He awoke before dawn, the BL.ing markers on his back tingling with increased sensitivity. Something was changing within the patterns, responding to proximity to the dungeon perhaps, or to his body's continuing adaptation to this world's energy. Dressing in his newly reinforced gear, Naruto joined the others for a quick breakfast before departing for Babel Tower. The morning air carried a crispness that reminded him of autumn in Konoha. Though Orario's architecture of stone and marble created different acoustics as their footsteps echoed through gradually awakening streets. At the tower's entrance, they found Artemis waiting with 3 companions, tall, athletic women with bows slung across their backs and silver circlets adorning their foreheads. Their matching attire of fitted leather armor reinforced with mithri L-plates identified them as a coordinated unit even before introductions. My senior hunters, Artemis explained. Callisto, Selene, and Phila. Each has reached level 5 through dedication to the hunt. The women assessed Naruto with professional scrutiny, their gazes noting his equipment, posture, and movement with practiced efficiency. He returned the evaluation equally, recognizing Elite F. IGHTERS whose teamwork suggested years of coordination. The guild has authorized a special expedition permit, Artemis continued, producing an ornate document bearing multiple official seals. We have exclusive access to a specific path through the upper floors to reach our testing grounds on floor 15 without interference. The dungeon entrance itself proved surprisingly organized, a massive archway leading to broad stone steps that descended into earth, flanked by guild officials who checked documentation and logged departures. Their group received particular attention, with whispers following their progress as they passed the initial checkpoints. Word of your unique status has spread quickly, Hestia noted as they descended the first flight of stairs. Expect increased monster activity as a result. Monsters respond to rumors, Naruto asked, surprised. Not to rumors specifically, Bell explained, taking point position as they reached the first underground level. But to unusual energy signatures and emotional states of adventurers. Your presence represents something the dungeon hasn't encountered before. The first 5 floors passed uneventfully, wide corridors carved from smooth stone, occasionally opening into larger chambers where scattered monsters resembling oversized insects or rodents kept their distance from the well-armed party. Guild maintained magical lighting illuminated their path, supplemented by crystalline formations that grew naturally from walls. These upper floors are essentially domesticated, Artemis explained with evident disappointment. Harvested daily by novice adventurers. Little challenge remains. As they descended further, however, the environment began changing subtly. Floor 10 brought higher ceilings and more complex branching passages, while Floor 12 introduced underground rivers and phosphorescent fungi that reduced dependence on artificial lighting. Throughout their descent, Naruto maintained careful awareness of his chakra flow, noting how it interacted with the dungeon's ambient energy. Something about this place felt increasingly resonant with natural energy, not identical to what he used for Sage Mode, but harmoniously compatible. We're approaching Floor 15, announced Callisto, the tallest of Artemis's hunters, her alert posture indicating increased caution. Monster density increases significantly from here. As if summoned by her words, growls echoed from a side passage ahead. 4 wolf-like creatures emerged, their red eyes glowing in the dim light and obsidian claws scraping against stone as they advanced. Hellhounds, Bell identified, drawing his knife which immediately began glowing with white energy. Fire breath capable and pack hunters. Watch for flanking maneuvers. Before anyone could move further, Naruto formed a familiar hand sign. Shadow Clone Jutsu. 4 perfect duplicates appeared beside him in puffs of smoke, each immediately assessing the tactical situation. The hellhounds faltered momentarily, confused by the sudden multiplication of their prey. Interesting, Artemis observed calmly, making no move to draw her weapon. Let's see how your techniques perform against dungeon-born monsters. Taking this as permission to handle the threat, Naruto nodded to his clones who immediately engaged the hellhounds, each clone selecting a target and moving with synchronized precision. Rather than using ninjutsu immediately, they employed taijutsu to test the creature's physical capabilities. The results proved informative. The hellhounds moved faster than their bulky frames suggested, their fire breath creating dangerous zones of lingering flame when it struck surfaces. However, their attack patterns followed predictable sequences that Naruto's TLE experienced clones easily identified. Their physical composition is denser than natural animals, one clone reported while evading a flaming lunge. More like elemental constructs than biological creatures. Fire affinity is integrated into their core essence, another observed, delivering a spinning kick that sent its opponent crashing into a wall. Chakra disruption might be effective. The real Naruto formed a small Rasengan, keeping it compact to test minimum effective power. When a hellhound broke past the clones and charged him directly, he thrust the spiraling sphere forward to connect with its chest. The reaction exceeded expectations. Instead of merely damaging the creature, the Rasengan's rotating chakra seemed to unravel the monster's cohesion at a fundamental level. Chi dissolved into glittering particles that condensed into a small crystalline stone that clattered to the ground. A direct crystal drop without physical destruction phase, Makoto noted with scientific interest. Chakra appears to accelerate the normal monster death process rather than causing conventional damage. Seeing the effectiveness, the shadow clones quickly dispatched the remaining hellhounds using precisely controlled chakra strikes, each monster collapsing into similar crystals rather than leaving physical remains. Bell collected the dropped crystals, examining them with experienced eyes. These are unusually pure. Typically, hellhound crystals have smoky inclusions from their fire element, but these are completely clear. Your energy neutralized the elemental aspect during dissolution, Artemis theorized, approaching to examine the crystals herself. Fascinating implications for crystal quality and purification techniques. They continued deeper into floor 15, countering progressively more challenging monster groups. Each engagement provided new insights into how Naruto's abilities interacted with dungeon entities. Shadow clones confused monster targeting systems designed for single opponents. Rasengan variants proved exceptionally effective at crystal extraction, and basic chakra enhancement allowed physical strikes to affect monsters normally resistant to conventional weapons. The blessing markers on Naruto's back continued to tingle throughout these encounters, seeming to respond to both his chakra use and the dungeon's ambient energy. Occasionally, he felt them pulse in patterns that corresponded to specific techniques, Artemis's mark resonating with Sage Mode preparation, Hestia's warming when he protected team members, and even Freya's Sipa. Rape Crescent flaring when he displayed particular combat prowess. During a brief rest period in a defensible chamber, Artemis approached him while the others catalogued crystal collections and consulted maps. "Your techniques are even more versatile than I anticipated," she commented, her silver-green eyes studying him with undisguised interest. "Particularly your connection to natural energy. I noticed something odd about the dungeon's energy," Naruto replied, keeping his voice low to avoid concerning the others. "It feels responsive somehow. Almost like it recognizes chakra." Artemis's expression sharpened. "That confirms a theory I've been developing. The dungeon isn't merely a location, it's a semi-sentient entity with its own energy system. Monsters are essentially specialized cells within that greater organism. And it's reacting to me specifically." She nodded slowly. "To your sage energy most strongly. Traditional magic interacts with the dungeon through opposition, forcing its energy to conform to external will. Your natural energy approach establishes resonance instead, which the dungeon apparently finds intriguing." Before Naruto could respond, a distant rumbling interrupted their conversation. The floor beneath them trembled slightly, dust sifting down from the ceiling. "That's not normal monster movement," Lily said worriedly, securing her pack. "Sounds like structural shifting." Phila, the most experienced of Artemis's hunters in dungeon navigation, frowned deeply. "This section hasn't experienced geographic restructuring in decades. Something's triggering a dungeon response." Another tremor, stronger than the first, shook the chamber. Cracks appeared in one wall, spreading outward in patterns that looked disturbingly like writing to Yuto's eyes, symbols similar to ancient sealing scripts used in the elemental nations. "We should move," Hestia declared firmly. "Whatever's happening, staying in one place makes us vulnerable." They quickly gathered their equipment and proceeded down the main corridor, moving with increased urgency as tremors continued at irregular intervals. The dungeon's layout began shifting around them, passages narrowing or widening unpredictably. New openings appearing in previously solid walls. "It's hurting us," Callisto observed grimly as another potential escape route sealed itself before they could take it. "Directing our path deeper. Toward what?" Bell wondered, maintaining protective positioning near Hestia. They received their answer upon entering a massive circular chamber they hadn't anticipated, a perfect dome at least 50 meters across, its walls covered in crystalline formations that pulsed with inner light. The floor featured concentric circles carved into stone, reminiscent of the training grounds in Konoha where Naruto had practiced his earliest jutsu. "This room shouldn't exist," Celine whispered, consulting her map with confusion. "Floor 15 doesn't have ceremonial chambers." Because it isn't part of Floor 15, Artemis realized, her divine senses clearly detecting something beyond mortal perception. "The dungeon has created this space specifically for us, or rather, for him." She nodded toward Naruto. In the chamber's center, a crystalline formation resembling a small tree rose from the floor, its branches reaching upward about 3 meters before spreading outward. Each branch terminated in a crystal that glowed with different colored light: red, blue, green, yellow, and others spanning the visible spectrum. It looks like a chakra visualization model, Naruto observed, recognizing similarities to training aids used in the academy to teach children about energy flow. The moment he spoke, the crystals pulsed in unison, responding to his voice. The concentric circles in the floor began glowing as well, energy flowing between them in patterns that resembled chakra pathways in the human body. "I believe this is why the dungeon guided us here," Artemis said quietly. "It wants you to interact with whatever this structure represents." "Could be a trap," Hestia warned, her protective instincts clearly triggered. Naruto closed his eyes briefly, extending his chakra sensitivity throughout the chamber. "It doesn't feel hostile," he concluded after careful assessment. "More expectant, if that makes sense." "Proceed with caution," Artemis advised. "We'll maintain defensive positions." The hunters spread out along the chamber's perimeter while Bell, Lily, and Makoto formed a protective triangle around Hestia. With his companions secured, Naruto approached the crystalline structure slowly, observing how the light patterns shifted in response to his proximity. At 3 meters distance, he felt the blessing markers on his back activate simultaneously, all 3 pulsing in perfect synchronization. The sensation wasn't painful but intensely present, as though the divine recognitions were preparing for something significant. "The blessing marks are responding," he informed the goddesses, who both nodded understanding. "Divine energy interacting with the dungeon's core essence," Artemis theorized. "Proceed if you feel it's safe." When Naruto reached the central structure, the crystals brightened dramatically, their colors shifting to match the specific energies he recognized, one crystal taking on the precise hue of Kurama's chakra, another matching his own natural blue, a third glowing with the golden energy of Sage Mode. "It knows me," he murmured with surprise. "Or at least, it recognizes my energy signatures." Acting on intuition, he placed his palm against the trunk of the crystal tree. Immediately, energy surged through the connection, not invasively but communicatively, as though exchanging information. Images flashed through his mind. A massive tree spanning multiple worlds, roots extending through dimensional boundaries, figures channeling energy remarkably similar to chakra though they clearly weren't shinobi, and most surprisingly, symbols that exactly matched the Otsutsuki clan's written language. The vision ended abruptly when a new tremor, more violent than any previous, shook the chamber. Cracks appeared in the distant ceiling, and the light patterns in the floor began fluctuating erratically. "Something's disrupting the process," Artemis called out, her hunters already knocking arrows as portions of the wall began collapsing inward. From these new openings poured monsters unlike any they'd encountered previously, humanoid figures with crystalline growths protruding from their bodies, moving with disturbing coordination rather than the animal-like behavior of standard dungeon creatures. "These aren't regular monsters," Bell warned, his knife flaring brilliantly as he prepared for combat. "They look like irregular variants, but those shouldn't appear above floor 30. The crystal tree pulsed once more before dimming significantly, its communication with Naruto apparent L.Y. terminated by whatever had triggered this attack. He stepped back as the first wave of crystal-infused humanoids charged forward, their movements suggesting intelligence beyond normal monster capacity. "Form defensive circle around the goddesses," Naruto commanded, years of battlefield leadership asserting themselves automatically. "I'll create breathing room." His hands formed the cross sign. Multi-shadow clone jutsu. 30 clones materialized throughout the chamber, immediately engaging the encroaching monsters to prevent them from overwhelming the group. Unlike previous encounters, these creatures didn't dissolve easily when struck with chakra. Instead, the crystalline growths absorbed energy, requiring more precise targeting of vulnerable points. "Aim for the base of the neck," one clone shouted after discovering an effective strike point. "Crystal structures are thinnest there." The hunters adapted quickly, their arrows finding the weakness with incredible accuracy. Bell and Makoto fought back to back, their contrasting styles, Bell's speed-based slashes and Makoto's Eastern martial techniques, complementing each other perfectly. Despite their coordination, the monsters kept coming in seemingly endless waves, each group more coordinated than the last. Naruto sensed a controlling intelligence behind the assault, directing these creatures with tactical purpose rather than mere aggression. "We need to retreat," Hestia called out, her divine perception clearly sensing something beyond the immediate threat. "The dungeon's structure is becoming increasingly unstable." Larger chunks of ceiling began falling as if confirming her assessment. Artemis directed her hunters to secure an escape route through one of the original entrances, their arrows clearing a path through clustered monsters. Naruto prepared to follow with the others when a sharp pain lanced through his back where the blessing markers had been placed. The sensation was followed immediately by a pulse of familiar chakra, the same signature he'd briefly detected earlier. "Someone from my world is here," he realized suddenly. "They're using the dungeon's instability as cover." A new figure appeared at the chamber's far side, humanoid but cloaked in shadows that seemed to absorb light rather than merely block it. Even at this distance, Naruto recognized the distinctive posture of a trained shinobi. "Go with the others," he instructed Hestia, who had noticed his distraction. "I need to investigate this." "We're not separating," she countered firmly, her usual cheerfulness replaced by divine authority. "Artemis, secure the exit." Naruto's detected something significant. The hunter goddess redirected her attention instantly, assessing the shadowy figure with narrowed eyes. Non-dungeon entity detected. Hunters. Formation 3. The mysterious figure seemed to realize they had been noticed, their shadow-wreathed form rippling before dissolving into what Naruto recognized as a body. Flicker technique. A shinobi transportation jutsu that confirmed his suspicions. "Definitely someone from my world," he confirmed grimly. That was a standard Junin-level technique. With the shadowy observer gone, the monster assault suddenly lost coordination, reverting to more predictable attack patterns that the group dispatched efficiently. Within minutes, they had cleared a path to the exit and began a strategic withdrawal. Naruto creating additional shadow clones to cover their retreat. The journey back through increasingly unstable dungeon passages proceeded with urgent purpose, Mors continuing at shorter intervals as they ascended. By the time they reached floor 10, even the normally stable upper regions showed signs of unusual activity, walls rippling as though fluid, crystals pulsing with erratic light. They emerged into Babel Tower's entrance hall to find guild officials in a state of controlled panic, adventurers being evacuated and research teams rushing to monitoring stations. "What's happening?" Bell asked a passing guild administrator who recognized their group. "Unprecedented dungeon activity across all accessible floors," the harried official explained quickly. "Energy readings suggest significant restructuring occurring simultaneously at multiple depth levels, something that's never been documented before." A senior guild representative approached their group directly, focusing on the two goddesses. "Lady Artemis, Lady Hestia, your expedition coincided with the onset of these anomalies. Did you observe anything that might explain the dungeon's behavior?" Artemis exchanged meaningful glances with Naruto before responding carefully. "We encountered a previously undocumented chamber on floor 15 that appeared to serve as a specialized communication node. Further investigation was interrupted by regular monster variants. And we detected a non-monster entity observing the situation," Hestia added. "Potentially connected to our interdimensional visitor's origin world." The official's eyes widened. "This requires immediate attention from the research division. Would you accompany me to provide detailed statements?" Hours later, after exhaustive debriefings and energy signature analyses, Naruto finally found himself released from guild questioning. The dungeon's activity had gradually stabilized, though researchers continued monitoring unusual energy fluctuations throughout the structure. Hestia, Artemis, and their respective familia members gathered in a private guild conference room to process what they'd learned. Crystal structure was attempting to communicate, Naruto explained, describing the visions he'd received. "It showed me images of what looked like a massive world tree connecting different realms, writing identical to an ancient clan from my world. The Otsutsuki, you called them." Artemis confirmed, her expression thoughtful. "And they were connected to the origin of chakra in your world." Naruto nodded. "They were essentially divine beings who came to our world from another dimension, bringing chakra with them. The fact that their written language appeared in your dungeon can't be coincidence. The implications are significant," Makoto observed. "If your world and ours share historical connections through these beings, the boundaries between our realms might be more permeable than we realized." Which could explain how you arrived here, Hestia concluded. Your space-time technique may have activated dormant pathways that already existed rather than creating new ones. Quote, and whoever was watching us in that chamber might have used the same pathway, Bell added with concern. Someone else from your world who arrived either before or after you. Naruto's expression hardened slightly. Their chakra signature seemed deliberately masked, but felt vaguely familiar. Not someone I know well, but possibly someone I've encountered. The guild is increasing security throughout the dungeon, Artemis informed them, and I've dispatched additional hunters to monitor unusual activity patterns. If this observer returns, we'll detect them. In the meantime, Hestia said with surprising firmness, we need to continue investigating these connections methodically rather than rushing headlong into danger. She gave Artemis a pointed look that clearly referenced their philosophical differences. The hunter goddess inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the reasonable caution. Agreed. The research division is analyzing the crystal samples we collected, which may provide additional insights. As the meeting concluded and they prepared to depart, Naruto felt the blessing markers on his back pulse once more, a gentle reminder of the connections he'd formed in this world, however unexpectedly. Despite the dangers and mysteries, he found himself appreciating the allies he'd already gathered. Bell approached as they exited the guild headquarters into evening twilight. Whatever's happening, you're not facing it alone, the young adventurer assured him with characteristic earnestness. That's what familia means, even an unofficial one. Naruto smiled, recognizing the echo of his own youthful determination in Bell's unwavering loyalty. Appreciate it. Where I come from, we called it the will of fire, the determination to protect what matters regardless of the odds. I like that, Bell replied with a grin. The will of fire. Sounds like something worth fighting for. Above them, stars began appearing in Orario's darkening sky, the same stars that might shine over Konoha, Naruto realized. If these worlds were indeed connected by roots deeper than anyone had imagined. Whatever shadow had watched them in the dungeon, whatever ancient connections existed between realms, he would face them with the same determination that had defined his life across worlds. The sage without a Falna had found something perhaps more valuable than divine blessing in T's strange new realm. He had found allies who understood what truly mattered. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, The Nature of Power. Dawn painted Orario in soft amber hues, the first rays of sunlight catching on Babel Tower's highest spires. Throughout the city, adventurers prepared for daily excursions into the dungeon while merchants arranged wares in anticipation of commerce. This mundane rhythm continued. Despite yesterday's unprecedented dungeon disturbance, the city's inhabitants accustomed to periodic disruptions in their monster hunting economy. In the modest church that housed Hestia Familia, Naruto sat cross-legged on the roof. Eyes closed in deep meditation. The night had brought unsettling dreams, fractured visions of towering trees with roots spanning dimensions, crimson eyes watching from shadows, and crystalline structures pulsing with familiar chakra. Rather than attempt further sleep, he'd chosen to center himself through the familiar practice of gathering natural energy. This Earl's natural energy felt increasingly resonant with his own chakra system. The blessing markers on his back had continued integrating overnight, creating subtle pathways through which he could sense Orario's unique energy patterns with growing clarity. The city itself emanated vitality distinct from both the dungeon below and the surrounding wilderness, countless souls generating signature NCIES that blended into a harmonious whole. You're adapting faster than expected, observed a quiet voice behind him. Naruto opened his eyes, turning to find Artemis perched on the church's bell tower. Her silver-green eyes studied him with scientific curiosity tempered by growing respect. Unlike yesterday's hunting attire, she wore a simple white tunic belted with silver cord, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. Despite the casual appearance, her divine presence remained unmistakable, moonlight lingering in morning sun. Good morning, Naruto greeted, rising fluidly to his feet. I didn't sense your approach. Divine movement, she explained with the barest hint of a smile. We can suppress our presence when desired, a necessity when hunting truly dangerous prey. Or when checking on interdimensional visitors, he suggested, matching her subtle humor. Her smile widened fractionally. Precisely. She gestured toward the horizon where forests stretched beyond city walls. I've spent the night consulting with my hunters stationed throughout the region. The dungeon disturbance created ripple effects in natural energy patterns extending at least 30 kilometers from Orario. Nature responding to the dungeon's activity, Naruto observed, remembering similar phenomena during major chakra events in his world. Artemis nodded. The two are connected more fundamentally than most realize. The dungeon represents concentrated primal energy, a nexus where raw creation manifests as monsters. The surrounding wilderness exists in balance with this concentration, like complementary forces. Yin and Yang, Naruto murmured, thinking of the fundamental duality underlying chakra theory. You understand intuitively, she noted with approval. Most adventurers view the engine merely as a resource to be exploited. Few comprehend its essential role in our world's energy balance. She stepped closer, studying his face with those ancient eyes that had witnessed millennia. Your sage mode connects directly with this balance. When you gather natural energy, you're not merely borrowing power but participating in the fundamental exchange that sustains reality. I've never thought of it quite that way, Naruto admitted. In his youth, techniques had been tools for achieving goals, protecting friends, defeating enemies, accomplishing missions. Only with maturity had he begun appreciating the deeper philosophical implications of manipulating life energy. The council meeting later today will address yesterday's discoveries, Artemis continued. Researchers have been analyzing the crystal samples throughout the night, and divine attention has focused firmly on the dungeon's unusual behavior. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Another council so soon? Events involving both interdimensional visitors and dungeon irregularities warrant immediate attention. A hint of amusement colored her voice. The gods bore easily during normal circumstances. Genuine mysteries provide rare entertainment. Below them, the church door opened as Bell emerged into the morning light, stretching after a night's rest. He spotted them on the roof and waved cheerfully. Breakfast is nearly ready, Hestia-sama said to tell you the guild messenger arrived with official summons. Artemis acknowledged this with a graceful nod before turning back to Naruto. Before we join the others, I wanted to propose something. Her tone shifted subtly, becoming more formal. As your partial patron, I believe you would benefit from experiencing true wilderness communion in this realm. After the council concludes, would you accompany me to the sacred grove northeast of Orario? The location represents a pure manifestation of natural energy that might help calibrate your sage abilities to our world's patterns. The invitation carried undertones Naruto couldn't quite decipher, something between professional interest and personal significance. I'd be honored, he replied sincerely. Understanding this world's natural energy could help explain how I arrived here. Satisfaction flickered across her features. Excellent. The grove has been under my protection since I descended to the mortal realm. Few were permitted entry. She stepped toward the roof's edge. Until the council meeting, then. With impossible grace, she simply stepped off the roof, her descent slowing midair as though gravity reconsidered its relationship with divinity. She landed lightly beside Bell, exchanged brief words, then departed with measured strides that somehow conveyed both human movement and immortal presence. Naruto descended more conventionally, channeling chakra through his feet to walk down the church's outer wall. Bell watched with undisguised admiration. That walking technique, could you teach me something similar? The young adventurer asked eagerly. Naruto considered this. Possibly. The principle involves channeling energy to create adhesion between your body and surfaces. Your Falna system might allow for similar applications with proper training. Bell's eyes lit with excitement. After breakfast then, before the council meeting, the enthusiasm reminded Naruto of his Genin days, that hunger for new techniques and abilities. We'll start with fundamentals, he agreed with a smile. Inside, Hestia supervised breakfast preparations with cheerful efficiency, delegating tasks to each familia member while somehow managing to appear both authoritative and endearingly domestic. She brightened as Naruto entered. Perfect timing. The guild wants you at the council meeting at midday. But that gives us the morning for proper integration. She gestured toward a chair at the table. Sit. Growing sages need proper nutrition. The growing comment might have seemed condescending from anyone else. But Hestia's maternal energy somehow rendered it genuinely caring. Naruto accepted a plate heaped with unfamiliar yet appetizing foods, noting how each familia member had received portions specifically tailored to their preferences. The hearth goddess knows her domain well, he thought, appreciating the subtle manifestation of her divine aspect in everyday moments. I understand Artemis has invited you to her sacred grove, Hestia remarked casually, too casually, while serving herself a modest portion. Quite the honor. She rarely allows visitors, she mentioned. It might help with understanding this world's natural energy, Naruto explained, noting the slight tension in Hestia's posture despite her conversational tone. Oh certainly, the hearth goddess agreed. The grove represents pure wilderness untouched by civilization. Very primal. She buttered a piece of bread with perhaps more force than necessary. Of course, understanding a world requires experiencing all its aspects. Balance is important. Lily and Makoto exchanged knowing glances across the table, while Bell remained oblivious to the undercurrents. Balance is essential, Naruto agreed diplomatically. I'm grateful for both wilderness insights and hearth wisdom. Hestia's expression brightened immediately. Speaking of hearth wisdom, I've arranged for you to participate in Ario's community council this evening. Representatives from various districts gather to address civilian needs outside adventuring concerns. Understanding our social fabric would provide valuable context for your time here. I'd be honored to attend, Naruto replied sincerely, recognizing the invitation's importance to her. As Hokage, he'd learned that community infrastructure mattered as much as spectacular jutsu for genuine stability. Conversation flowed easily from there, Makoto discussing theoretical connections between chakra and their world's magic system, Lily explaining economic structures that governed Ario's unique monster-based economy, and Bell occasionally interjecting with enthusiastic questions about shinobi techniques. After breakfast, Naruto fulfilled his promise to Bell, taking the young adventurer to the church's rear courtyard for basic chakra exercises. Though the energies differed fundamentally, Naruto adapted the leaf-sticking exercise to utilize Bell's Falna-based abilities. Focus on feeling the connection between your internal energy and the leaf, he instructed, demonstrating by adhering a leaf to his forehead through chakra control. The principle transcends-specific power systems. Energy projected with precision creates bonds between objects. Bell struggled initially, his intense concentration actually impeding the delicate balance required. Several failed attempts where leaves either fell immediately or crumpled from excess power. Naruto adjusted his approach. Try thinking of it as conversation rather than command, he suggested. You're not forcing the leaf to stick, you're inviting connection. This conceptual shift produced immediate improvement. Within an hour, Bell maintained a leaf against his palm for several seconds, but significant progress for a first attempt at adapting Falna energy to chakra-like application. It feels different from magic, Bell observed, perspiration beading his forehead from sustained concentration. More intimate somehow, like I'm using parts of myself I didn't know existed. That's precisely it, Naruto confirmed with approval. Traditional chakra users access physical and spiritual energies directly rather than channeling them through external systems. Their practice concluded when Makoto arrived with a message from the guild. Their escort to the council meeting had arrived earlier than expected. Naruto instructed Bell to continue practicing energy projection in small doses, warning against overexertion when working with unfamiliar techniques. The guild escort proved more elaborate than yesterday's. 4 members of Ganesha familia riding magnificent creatures resembling elephants though considerably smaller and adorned with ceremonial armor. The lead rider, Oman, whose Falna marking was visible as an intricate pattern on her exposed shoulder, bowed respectfully from her mount. Sage Uzumaki, Lady Hestia, Lord Ganesha extends his personal greeting and oath. His familia's escort to today's emergency council. Ganesha's sending escorts. Hestia raised her eyebrows in surprise. The situation must be more serious than anticipated. The journey to Babe El Tower attracted considerable attention, partly due to the impressive mounts, partly because word of Naruto's exploits had spread throughout Ario. Citizens paused their activities to watch the procession, many bowing respectfully as they passed. Some called out Naruto's newly acquired title, the Sage Without Falna, while others made gestures that appeared to be religious acknowledgments of some kind. Your reputation grows quickly, Hestia commented, riding beside him on a smaller mount. defeating a floor boss publicly, then being connected to dungeon disturbances. Orario loves its legends. I'm not seeking legendary status. Naruto responded, somewhat uncomfortable with the attention. Fame had followed him since childhood, evolving from the burden of being the Nine-Tails Jinchurik. Ida, the hero of the fourth great ninja war. He'd learned that public adulation was as transient as public condemnation. Hestia studied him thoughtfully. Few seek legends, legends seek them. Your AR. Rival created ripples throughout divine and mortal realms alike. How those ripples develop depends partly on how you navigate these waters. Her wisdom reminded him that despite her occasionally childish mannerisms, Hestia was an ancient deity with profound understanding of how stories shaped reality. The council chamber had been reconfigured since yesterday's meeting, the circular arrangement placed by a horseshoe formation with research stations positioned around the periphery. Guild officials in white laboratory attire attended various crystalline instruments, while scribes prepared NSIVE documentation at dedicated stations. Deities had already gathered in significant numbers, their conversations creating a melodic cacophony that somehow maintained harmonious undertones despite conflicting topics. Artemis acknowledged their arrival with a slight nod from her position near several hunters who appeared to be delivering field reports. Freya, conspicuously absent yesterday, now occupied a prominent position near the chamber's center, her silver-gray attire somehow drawing light despite its subdued palette. Her perfect features revealed nothing as she observed Naruto's entrance, though her silver eyes tracked his movement with undisguised interest. Odin called the council to order with a single tap of his staff against the floor, the sound reverberating with authority. At immediately silenced all conversation. We convene to address significant developments concerning both our interdimensional visitor and unprecedented dungeon activity, the ancient deity announced. Guild Research Division, present your findings. A tall, slender elf with eyes so dark they appeared nearly black stepped forward, gesturing toward a central display where crystalline fragments Fr. Yesterday's expedition hovered within a containment field. Honorable Council, I am Riveriel Yos Alf, representing the joint research initiative between Loki Familia and the Guild. Her voice IED the precise diction of extensive education combined with natural authority. Our analysis confirms these crystals contain energy signatures matching no known monster type in our comprehensive database. She manipulated controls that magnified the display, revealing internal structures within the crystal fragments. More significantly, these formations contain informational patterns, essential LY encoded data rather than merely crystallized energy. This announcement caused murmurs among the assembled deities. Informational crystals existed in their world but typically required deliberate enchantment by skilled mages. Natural formations with such properties were unprecedented. When exposed to energy matching Sage Uzumaki's recorded signature, Riveria continued, the crystals emit IFIC resonance frequencies that correlate with what our scholars recognize as an ancient language predating human civilization. The display shifted again, showing symbols that made Naruto straighten. In his seat, unmistakably Otsutsuki clan script, identical to records he'd seen in Konoha's restricted archives. These symbols, Riveria explained, appear in fragmentary records from before the gods' descent. They are associated with what our oldest texts call the World Tree, a mythological construct said to connect multiple realms through dimensional roots. Odin's cosmic eyes narrowed at this revelation, his ancient features betraying rare surprise. The World Tree is not merely mythology, he stated with absolute certainty. Before our descent, we observed its higher branches connecting divine realms. That its roots might extend to mortal worlds beyond our own is significant. Sage Uzumaki, Riveria turned toward Naruto. Our instruments detected your chakra responding specifically to these symbols. Can you explain their significance in your world? All eyes turned to Naruto, who considered his response carefully. Revealing everything about the Otsutsuki might create unnecessary panic. But withholding critical information could prove dangerous for both worlds. In my world, these symbols belong to an ancient clan called the Otsutsuki, he explained, rising to approach the display. They were interdimensional travelers who arrived on my world thousands of years ago, bringing chakra, our power source, with them. He pointed to specific symbols in the display. This references divine tree, a central element of their philosophy. They believed in harvesting worlds by growing these trees, which absorbed life energy for their consumption. The chamber fell silent as implications registered. Finally, a deity draped in shadow-shifting robes spoke from the far side of the horseshoe. You speak of world devourers, entities that consumed entire realms. Naruto nodded grimly. My world fought a war against their descendants, powerful beings who viewed humans as mere resources rather than equal lifeforms. And you believe similar entities connected to our world? Questioned Apollo, his golden features registering elegant concern. The evidence suggests historical connection, Naruto clarified. Whether active Otsutsuki currently threaten this world, I can't say with certainty. But these symbols in your dungeon can't be coincidence. Freya spoke for the first time, her melodic voice cutting through tension with surprising warmth. Might this explain your presence here, sage? Perhaps ancient pathways between worlds reactivated through your space-time technique. That's my current theory, Naruto agreed. The jutsu we were testing may have resonated with dormant connections established millennia ago. Riveria gestured toward another display where energy patterns flowed in complex formations. This hypothesis aligns with our observations of on energy fluctuations following your arrival. The disturbances appear concentrated around specific nodes that form a pattern resembling root structures when mapped three-dimensionally. She manipula. TED controls to display this root-like network extending throughout the dungeon's known levels. These nodes show increased activity corresponding with Sage Uzumaki's chakra usage, particularly when he employs natural energy techniques. Which suggests, Artemis interjected thoughtfully, that his sage abilities are activating dormant systems within the dungeon, perhaps pathways designed to respond to natural energy manipulation. Precisely, Riveria confirmed. Furthermore, yesterday's expedition encountered specialized monsters seemingly designed to protect these activation nodes, crystal inhumanoids unlike standard dungeon-born creatures. Hestia leaned forward, her expression troubled. These guardians appeared immediately after Naruto connected with the crystal tree structure. Almost as if, she hesitated. As if something was preventing communication. Or someone, added a new voice from the chamber entrance. All eyes turned to see a tall, powerfully built god with dark red hair and eyes like smoldering coals. His attire, midnight blue robes with swirling fire patterns, marked him as Hephaestus, god of the forge and one of Orario's most influential deities. My Smith S. recovered this from the dungeon's 13th floor, he announced, gesturing to attendants who carried forward an object covered in protective cloth. Found embedded in a wall following yesterday's disturbances. The attendants placed their burden on a central table and carefully removed the covering, revealing a weapon that made Naruto's breath catch, a specialized kunai with 3 prongs and sealing formulas inscribed on its handle. The design was unmistakable to anyone familiar with Konoha's history. The Flying Thunder God kunai, Naruto identified quietly. Signature weapon of the 4th Hokage, Minato Namikaze. My father, he added silently. You recognize this artifact? Odin questioned, studying Naruto's reaction carefully. Yes, it's a specialized weapon designed for an advanced space-time technique. Naruto approached the kunai, examining the sealing formula. This particular version includes modifications I haven't seen before, adaptations to the standard formula. Hephaestus nodded gravely. My smiths detected unusual energy emanating from the inscriptions, power similar to your signature but distinct in application. The metal itself contains properties unknown in our world. This confirms another visitor from your realm, Artemis concluded, her hunter's instincts clearly engaged. The shadow observer from yesterday's expedition. Someone skilled in space-time ninjutsu, Naruto agreed. Mind racing through possibilities. Few possessed both knowledge of Flying Thunder God technique and the skill to modify its formulas. The technique allows instantaneous transportation between marked locations, essentially creating fixed points in space-time that the user can access regardless of distance. Which explains how they monitored your dungeon expedition without maintaining physical presence. Freya observed, her silver eyes narrowed thoughtfully. They placed markers at strategic locations, allowing observation and rapid intervention. Riveria manipula. TED controls to highlight specific points in the dungeon map. Energy disturbances matching this weapon's signature have been detected at these locations, primarily junctions where corridors intersect. Or near chambers showing increased crystalline growth. A surveillance network, Artemis concluded with professional appreciation. Strategically positioned to monitor dungeon reactions to your presence. Odin's ancient gaze fixed on Naruto. Can you identify this individual from your world? Not with certainty, Naruto replied honestly. The Flying Thunder God technique originated with the second Hokage but was perfected by the fourth. Few others mastered it completely, though several attempted variations over the years. He studied the kunai's modifications thoughtfully. These adaptations suggest someone with deep understanding of space-time principles but approaching implementation differently than Konoha's traditional methods. Possibly someone who studied the technique rather than learned directly from its creators. Which still leaves us with an unknown entity establishing surveillance throughout our dungeon, concluded Apollo with elegant concern. One apparently intent on preventing communication between Sage Uzumaki and whatever intelligence resides within these crystal formations. The timing of monster attacks precisely when communication initiated cannot be coincidence. Agreed. A battle-scarred goddess Naruto hadn't previously met. Tactical intervention suggests specific agenda. Odin tapped his staff thoughtfully. This situation requires direct investigation rather than mere theorizing. Sage Uzumaki, would you be willing to participate in a focused expedition to locate and potentially communicate with this observer from your world? Of course, Naruto agreed without hesitation. If someone else from my world is here, understanding their purpose is critical, especially if they're interfering with these ancient systems. Excellent, Odin nodded. Artemis, your hunter's tracking abilities would be valuable for this mission. Hestia, your familia's experience with the dungeon's middle levels provides necessary support. Freya, he turned toward the silver-haired goddess. Your Autar's strength would provide significant advantage should confrontation occur. Each named deity inclined their head in acceptance of these assignments, though. Naruto noted the subtle competition in their postures, particularly between Hestia and Freya, whose contrasting domains seemed to create natural tension. The expedition will depart tomorrow at dawn, Odin declared. Guild resources will provide necessary support and documentation. Until then, continued research into these crystal formations remains priority. As the council shifted to specific preparation details, Naruto found himself studying the modified Flying Thunder God kunai with growing concern. The weapon represented sophisticated knowledge of Konoha's most guarded techniques, Nold. Few possessed outside the village's highest echelons. You're troubled by this discovery, observed a quiet voice beside him. Freya had approached silently while others engaged in planning discussions. Her divine presence somehow muted to avoid drawing attention. This technique requires exceptional skill, Naruto explained, keeping his voice equally low. Whoever placed this has advanced knowledge of space-time manipulation. Freya studied the kunai with detached interest. In our world, certain souls demonstrate natural affinity for specific magical domains, individuals born with innate connection to elemental forces or dimensional principles. Does your world manifest similar specializations? Some clans develop genetic predispositions toward particular chakra types, Naruto acknowledged. The Uchiha with fire, the Nara with shadows. Space-time techniques, however, typically require specific training rather than innate talent. Fascinating distinction, she murmured. Her severe eyes shifted from the weapon to Naruto's face, studying him with intensity that would have unnerved most mortals. Your soul contains similar spatial markers, connection points linking to distant locations. Part of your essence remains anchored elsewhere. Her observation startled him. You can see that. A smile curved her perfect lips. Souls are my domain, Sage Uzumaki. Yours presents particularly interesting reading. Layers of connections extending beyond conventional limitations, including tethers to your original world. This information held profound implications. These connections might explain how I arrived here, and potentially how I could return. Perhaps, she agreed, though something in her tone suggested reluctance at the prospect of his departure. Though severing such connections prematurely could prove problematic. Before Naruto could pursue this line of questioning, Hestia appeared beside them, her cheerful expression containing subtle steel as she addressed Freya. The expedition planning requires input from all participating familias. Your Autar's battle positioning specifically. Of course, Freya replied smoothly, her perfect features revealing nothing but professional courtesy. We mustn't keep our colleagues waiting, To Naruto, she added more softly, we should continue our discussion of soul tethering at a more appropriate time. Perhaps you might visit my tower after today's council concludes. Actually, Hestia interjected before Naruto could respond, we have prior commitments this evening. Community council meeting, important for understanding Orario's civilian infrastructure. How conscientious, Freya commented with the barest hint of amusement. Another time, then, with graceful poise that somehow conveyed both acquiescence and absolute confidence, she returned to the planning session. Hestia watched her departure with narrowed eyes before turning to Naruto. Be careful with that one. Freya's interest never comes without cost. I appreciate the warning, Naruto replied diplomatically, though her insights about soul connections might prove valuable for understanding my situation. True enough, Hestia acknowledged grudgingly. Just remember that information is currency among deities, freely given only when the exchange benefits the giver. The council meeting concluded with expedition details finalized, Epitor scheduled from Babel Tower at dawn, equipment requisitions approved through emergency guild protocols, and communication systems established for constant monitoring. Throughout these practical arrangements, Naruto couldn't shake the nagging familiarity of the modified Flying Thunder God technique. Something about the formula adaptations triggered recognition just beyond conscious grasp, remembering a face but forgetting the name. As attendees departed, Artemis approached with purposeful strides. Our Grove excursion should proceed despite tomorrow's expedition, she stated rather than suggested. Understanding this world's natural energy could prove critical when confronting another shinobi. Naruto nodded agreement. Good point. How far is this grove from Orario? Approximately 3 hours northeast by conventional travel, she replied. Though I can expedite the journey through divine pathways if you're comfortable with alternative transportation. Alternative transportation? Naruto questioned. A rare smile crossed Artemis's features. My chariot, typically reserved for solstice hunts, but circumstances warrant exception. Hestia's eyes widened. You're offering your moon chariot? That's unprecedented. Unprecedented circumstances, Artemis replied simply. To Naruto, she explained, the vehicle allows rapid transit through natural spaces, essentially compressing distance where wilderness energy flows strongly. Sounds similar to certain space-time techniques in my world, Naruto observed with interest. I'd be honored to experience it. Excellent. Artemis appeared genuinely pleased. We'll depart after you've fulfilled your community council obligations with Hestia. The Grove is particularly responsive during twilight transitions. With arrangements confirmed, they exited the council chamber into Babel Tower's central atrium where various familia representatives engaged in animated discussions about recent developments. Word of Tomo, Ro's specialized expedition had apparently spread quickly, creating speculation about its purpose and potential outcomes. Bell approached through the crowd, having awaited the council's conclusion in public areas. How serious is the situation? He asked without preamble, clearly concerned by the extended deliberations. Serious enough to warrant coordinated investigation, Hestia answered honestly. But not immediate crisis level. We'll discuss specifics during preparation this evening. They proceeded toward the tower's exit, only to find their path intercepted by an elaborate procession. Entering from the street, guild officials escorting a palanquin carried by 4 massive warriors whose bulging muscles strained even their impressive frames. The conveyance itself radiated subtle power, its wooden structure incorporating magical elements that shimmered with contained energy. The procession halted directly before them, and the palanquin's silken curtains parted to reveal a deity Naruto hadn't previously encountered, a woman of extraordinary beauty with golden eyes containing sunfire depth and hair like molten copper that seemed to flow rather than merely move. Her attire combined elegant simplicity with subtle opulence, fabric that appeared simultaneously modest and impossibly fine, adorned with symbols that shifted perspective depending on viewing angle. Lady Amaterasu, Hestia greeted with formal respect that suggested significant divine standing. This is unexpected. The sun rarely graces Babel's interior. The goddess inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the greeting while her intense gaze remained fixed on Naruto. Circumstances warrant direct observation, she replied, her voice carrying harmonics that reminded Naruto of wind through summer leaves. Sage without Falna has disturbed patterns long established. She addressed Naruto directly, those golden eyes seeming to evaluate layers beyond physical presence. You carry solar essence within you. Core being. Fire-natured chakra cultivated beyond conventional parameters. Fascinating adaptation for one not born to celestial lineage. Her statement demonstrated knowledge of chakra theory that surprised Naruto. You're familiar with my world's energy system. A smile curved lips that seemed to capture and reflect light. Celestial principles transcend dimensional boundaries, Sage Uzumaki. The sun's essence remains fundamental regardless of which world it illuminates. She made a subtle gesture, and an attendant stepped forward bearing a small wooden box carved with intricate solar symbols. The artifact recovered from your dungeon bears connection to transportation principles I recognize from ancient observations, Amaterasu continued. Before dimensions solidified their boundaries, certain pathways remained accessible to those with proper understanding. Your arrival has initiated resonance patterns in these dormant systems. She opened the box personally, revealing a small crystal sphere that glowed with inner light resembling captured sunshine. This harmonizer will facilitate communication with the crystal formations you encountered. A focusing tool, if you will. Naruto accepted the offered crystal carefully, immediately sensing its compatibility with his chakra system. The sphere responded to his touch, its inner light pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Remarkable attunement, Amaterasu observed with evident satisfaction. Your natural affinity confirms my suspicions regarding your role in current convergence patterns. Convergence patterns? Hestia questioned, her expression suggesting this terminology carried specific significance. Amaterasu's golden gaze shifted briefly to the hearth goddess. Dimensional boundaries fluctuate cyclically, Hestia. You've observed previous thinning periods during your tenure in this realm. The current cycle demonstrates unusual intensity, likely catalyzed by the Sage's space-time technique intersecting with established pathways. She returned her attention to Naruto. I would request your presence at the Solar Temple before tomorrow's expedition. Certain calibrations would enhance the harmonizer's effectiveness when confronting the crystal formations. This invitation created immediate tension. Hestia's planned community council, Artemis's arranged grove excursion, and now Amaterasu's solar temple UEST directly competing for limited time. Perhaps a shared approach would prove most efficient, suggested Artemis pragmatically. The community council concludes at dusk, after which my chariot LD transport both Sage Uzumaki and Lady Amaterasu to locations of significance, the solar temple first, followed by the sacred grove. Amaterasu considered this with celestial calculation. Acceptable compromise, provided sufficient time remains for proper attunement before dawn. Hestia appeared less convinced but nodded reluctant agreement. Coordinated effort serves everyone's interests during unusual circumstances. With arrangements tentatively established, Amaterasu's procession continued its stately progress through Babel Tower, leaving Naruto with growing appreciation for the complex divine politics underlying Orario's apparently straightforward surface. Each deity operated from fundamentally different philosophical frameworks while maintaining careful diplomatic balance, not unlike the Hidden Village's perpetual alliance negotiations. Amaterasu rarely involves herself directly in mortal affairs, Hestia explained as they exited the tower into afternoon sunlight. Her domain encompasses celestial movements and solar cycles, fundamental forces rather than daily concerns. Her interest suggests your situation holds cosmic significance, Bell added with undisguised awe. He solar harmonizer is legendary, rumored to exist but never confirmed publicly. Which means, Hestia concluded with a concerned frown, that whatever connection exists between worlds extends beyond mere chance arrival. Cosmic forces don't activate for trivial disruptions. They proceeded toward Orario's central district where the community council would convene at the city's oldest hearth, a sacred site dedicated to Hestia long before Babel Tower's construction. The route took them through bustling marketplaces where merchants had already incorporated recent events into their sales pitches. Protection amulets guaranteed effective against dimensional disturbances. Genuine sage-blessed water, collected from where he battled the floor boss. Authentic dungeon crystals from yesterday's expedition. Witness the convergence energies. Naruto observed this commercial adaptation with amusement. Entrepreneurial spirit transcends dimensions, apparently. Mortals excel at finding profit in chaos. Hestia agreed with indulgent affection. Though I should clarify, you haven't actually blessed any water, should someone ask directly. Their arrival at the central hearth square coincided with gathering council representatives, individuals from every district bringing community concerns for collective consideration. Unlike the Divine Council's formal proceedings, this assembly operated with practical efficiency focused on immediate issues affecting Orario's non-adventuring population. Hestia assumed a different presence here, less the divine entity and more community advocate, greeting representatives by name and inquiring about specific concerns with genuine interest. Naruto recognized effective leadership techniques in her approach, creating personal connection while maintaining structural awareness across multiple constituencies. The council addresses practical matters often overlooked by adventurer-focused governance, she explained as representatives arranged themselves around the massive central hearth. Infrastructure maintenance, education accessibility, craft standardization, essential functions that maintain Orario's foundation. The proceedings began with DISTRICT reports, systematic assessment of conditions throughout the city, with particular attention to areas affected by yesterday's dungeon disturbances. Residential buildings near Babel Tower had experienced minor structural damage from energy fluctuations, while water distribution systems showed temporary disruption in northeastern districts. Naruto listened with professional interest, recognizing parallels to Konoha's civilian administration systems. Effective governance required balancing spectacular adventures with mundane maintenance, a lesson he'd learned through sometimes painful experience as Hokage. When introduced to the assembly, Naruto spoke briefly about coordinated crisis response techniques developed in his world, methods for integrating civilian protection with professional intervention during unexpected disasters. The representatives responded with enthusiastic questions, clearly appreciating practical knowledge over dramatic displays of power. As discussions continued, Naruto noticed a figure observing from shadows beneath a nearby colonnade, tall and statuesque with platinum blonde hair and eyes that reflected ambient light like polished metal. Otar, Freya's most powerful familia member, maintained discreet surveillance without direct interference. When opportunity presented during a brief recess, Naruto approached the massive warrior, who acknowledged his awareness with a respectful inclination of his head. Your goddess seems interested in my activities beyond tomorrow's expedition, Naruto observed conversationally. Otar's expression remained professionally neutral. Lady Freya maintains awareness of significant developments throughout Orario. Your participation in community governance represents potentially important data point. Data collection or strategic assessment? Naruto questioned mildly. The faintest ghost of a smile touched the warrior's stern features. Lady Freya's interests typically encompass multiple dimensions of evaluation. Tell her I appreciate thorough preparation for tomorrow's expedition, Naruto replied, matching the diplomatic phrasing. And that I remain open to discussing soul-tethering connections when circumstances permit. Otar nodded once, message received and acknowledged without further elaboration. The exchange reminded Naruto of Anbu communications, conveying significant content through minimal visible interaction. The council concluded as twilight approached, having addressed immediate concerns and established response protocols for potential further disturbances. Hestia's participation had demonstrated deeper community integration than Naruto had initially recognized. Her small familia compensated for limited numbers through extensive civilian connections. The hearth touches all homes, she explained as they departed the square. My domain may appear humble compared to conquest or beauty or celestial forces, but its influence extends through every aspect of daily life. Never underestimate foundations, Naruto agreed, thinking of his own journey from village outcast to leader. The most visible structures depend on what supports them from below. Hestia brightened at his understanding. Precisely. Freya may command Orario's most powerful fighters, but when pipes burst or food distribution fails, civilians remember who maintains their hearths. Their philosophical discussion paused as they reached the city's northeastern gate where Artemis awaited beside something that challenged Naruto's definition of chariot. The vehicle resembled a crescent moon crafted silver-white material that wasn't quite metal nor wood, suspended above ground by invisible forces and harnessed to two magnificent stags whose antlers glowed with ethereal light. Magnificent, breathed Belle, who had accompanied them from the council meeting. I've only heard stories about the moon chariot. Artemis acknowledged his appreciation with a nod before addressing Naruto and Hestia. Amaterasu awaits us at the eastern crossroads. We should proceed immediately to maintain our schedule. Hestia hesitated, clearly reluctant to conclude her time with Naruto. Remember to observe regular mortal limitations. She finally instructed, her tone attempting professional distance despite obvious personal concern. Divine transportation can disorient those unaccustomed to dimensional compression. I'll be careful, Naruto assured her, recognizing the protective instinct beneath her advisory. Thank you for sharing your community work today. It provided valuable perspective. Her expression softened. That's what Hearth wisdom offers, grounding perspective amid cosmic forces. With visible effort, she stepped back. Bell will coordinate preparation for tomorrow's expedition. Turn to the church afterward if you wish. The subtle invitation to choose his returning destination didn't escape Naruto's notice. With respectful acknowledgement, he joined Artemis on the silver chariot, which adjusted its dimensions to accommodate his presence without apparent mechanism. As they departed Orario with unnatural speed, the landscape blurring around them while the vehicle itself maintained perfect stability, Naruto observed how Artemis's connection to the chariot operated beyond physical control. Her divine essence synchronized with the vehicle directly, guiding movement through will rather than mechanical interface. Your expression suggests analysis rather than disorientation, she noted with approval. Most mortals experience significant disruption during their first transit. Space-time manipulation exists in my world, Naruto explained, though typically achieved through different methods. The principle of compressing distance remains consistent. They moved through forest and field with impossible grace, the stags seemingly running above terrain rather than upon it. Within minutes, they reached a crossroads where ancient standing stones marked intersection points between old forest paths. Amaterasu awaited there, her palanquin absent, standing directly beneath early evening's first stars with solar radiance somehow lingering around her form despite fading daylight. The convergence intensifies, she stated without preamble as they approached. Dungeon systems show increasing activation patterns across multiple levels. She joined them on the chariot, which expanded seamlessly to accommodate her presence. Unlike Artemis's practical hunter's attire, Amaterasu wore flowing robes that seemed woven from sunset itself, colors shifting between gold, crimson, and deepest amber as fabric moved. Their journey continued northeastward, the chariot now radiating combined energies of both goddesses, Artemis's silver-green moonlight harmonizing with Amaterasu's golden solar essence. Naruto observed this divine cooperation with interest, noting how their fundamentally different aspects achieved balance rather than conflict. The flying thunder god Kunai recovered today bears particular significance, Amaterasu observed as landscapes blurred past. Its formula modifications suggest specialized adaptation for interdimensional transit rather than merely spatial displacement. Naruto turned toward her with renewed interest. You recognize the formula's purpose. Golden eyes met his gaze directly. Certain principles remain consistent across realms, Sage Uzumaki. The symbols represent dimensional anchoring using triangulation methodology, essentially creating stable reference points between worlds rather than merely within them. This assessment aligned with Naruto's own analysis but added crucial insight. So whoever placed it was establishing permanent pathways between worlds, not just surveillance points. Precisely, Amaterasu confirmed. The question becomes whether these pathways serve exploratory purpose or preparation for larger-scale transit. The chariot slowed as they approached a massive structure nestled among ancient tea trees, a temple complex whose architecture combined elegant simplicity with astronomical precision. Designed to capture specific solar alignments, the building incorporated crystal elements that channeled light into interior chambers through carefully calculated angles. The solar temple, Amaterasu identified as they disembarked. Constructed before human civilization established permanent settlements in this region. The site marks celestial convergence point where boundary membranes between realms thin naturally during specific astronomical alignments. They proceeded through columns carved with solar symbols, many bearing striking resemblance to the Otsutsuki clan markings Naruto had observed in the crystal formations. Interior chambers gradually descended below ground level, illuminated by captured sunlight redirected through crystal relays despite the advancing evening. The central chamber expanded into a perfect dome whose ceiling depicted star patterns unfamiliar to Naruto. At the room's center stood a raised dais supporting a crystalline apparatus, concentric rings suspended in delicate balance around a central sphere that pulsed with golden light. The celestial harmonizer, Amaterasu identified, gesturing toward the apparatus, attuned to solar frequencies that penetrate dimensional boundaries. The personal harmonizer I provided interfaces with this larger system, allowing calibrated communication with similar frequencies elsewhere. She extended her hand. May I? Naruto produced the small crystal sphere she had given him earlier. In the temple's specialized environment, the harmonizer glowed more intensely, its inner light pulsating in complex patterns that synchronized with the larger apparatus as Amaterasu placed it within the central mounting. Place your hands on the outer rings, she instructed, positioning herself opposite him. Channel natural energy as you would for your sage mode, but allow the system to guide its circulation rather than directing it yourself. Naruto complied, extending his awareness into the meditative state preceding sage mode. As natural energy gathered, he felt the temple's unique resonance influencing its flow, directing accumulated power through pathways that connected to the central harmonizer rather than his personal chakra system. The apparatus responded immediately, its concentric rings beginning to rotate at different speeds and angles, creating three-dimensional patterns that shifted between configurations with mathematical precision. The central sphere, now containing both his personal harmonizer and the temple's core crystal, expanded its radiance until golden light filled the chamber completely. Through this luminous connection, Naruto sensed presences beyond immediate perception, distant consciousness observing through layers of reality, attention focused on the communication attempt. Images formed in his mind, massive root structures extending through dimensional boundaries, crystal formations growing along these roots, serving as communication nodes, entities moving along these pathways, some familiar in essence, others entirely alien. Most distinctly, he perceived the dungeon itself, not as physical location but as nexus point where multiple dimensional layers converged, creating access potential between otherwise separated realms. The crystal formations they had encountered represented specialized interfaces where communication between worlds became possible under specific conditions. The vision shifted suddenly, focusing on a specific presence moving through these dimensional pathways, a consciousness that felt disturbingly familiar though not immediately identifiable. This entity utilized the Flying Thunder God markers to navigate between specific points, establishing controlled transit routes while carefully avoiding detection. As Naruto attempted to focus on this presence more directly, resistance manifested, deliberate interference blocking clearer perception. The harmonizer's golden light fluctuated as competing energies disrupted its frequency patterns. Someone blocks the connection, Amaterasu observed, her divine perception clearly sensing the same interference. Sophisticated energy manipulation specifically countering the harmonizer's resonance. The disruption intensified until the connection shattered completely, the harmonizer's light collapsing inward before stabilizing at significantly reduced intensity. The rotating rings slowed gradually until returning to their original positions, the celestial alignment broken. Deliberate interruption, Amaterasu confirmed as the system powered down, precisely calculated to disconnect specific frequencies while maintaining others. Whoever opposes our investigation possesses detailed knowledge of both interdimensional communication principles and this particular system's operational parameters. She retrieved Naruto's personal harmonizer from the central mount, examining it thoughtfully. The disruption pattern itself provides valuable information. Your counterpart employs techniques similar to your own chakra manipulation but modified to interact with our world's natural systems. Could you identify anything about them? Naruto asked, processing the fragmented impressions he'd received during the connection. Amaterasu's golden eyes narrowed in concentration. A divide, D presence, similar to your own dual-natured essence but manifesting differently. Where your partnership with your internal entity achieves harmony, this presence demonstrates unstable integration. Powerful but inconsistent. This description triggered recognition pathways in Naruto's mind. Certain individuals in his world had attempted imperfect Jinchuriki transformations or partial Biju assimilations with similarly unstable results. The information narrowed potential candidates significantly, though still leaving multiple possibilities. The attunement provided sufficient data despite interruption, Amaterasu concluded. Returning his personal harmonizer. This will function more effectively during tomorrow's expedition, allowing direct interface with the crystal formations when encountered. They exited the temple into full night, stars brilliantly visible above ancient trees whose massive forms had witnessed centuries of celestial cycles. Artemis awaited with her chariot at the temple entrance, her silver-green eyes reflecting starlight as she studied their expressions. Successful communion, she inquired, noting the harmonizer's enhanced glow. Partial success with informative interruption, Amaterasu replied. The opposing force revealed tactical capabilities through their disruption methodology. We proceed better prepared than before. They boarded the chariot once more, Artemis directing their path deeper into pristine wilderness. Unlike the journey to the solar temple, this transit proceeded at more measured pace, allowing Naruto to observe the changing environment. Meant as civilization's influence receded completely. Ancient forests gave way to primal wilderness untouched by human development, massive trees whose species Naruto didn't recognize creating canopies that filtered moonlight into dappled patterns. Wildlife moved through underbrush without fear, some creatures pausing to observe their passage with intelligent curiosity rather than instinctive caution. We approach the boundary of the sacred grove, Artemis explained as the chariot slowed further. Beyond this point, even divine transportation proceeds by nature's permission rather than a mortal will. The distinction became immediately apparent as they crossed an invisible threshold, the air itself changing quality, becoming somehow more substantial while simultaneously easier to breathe. Natural energy saturated the environment so completely that Naruto felt it without conscious effort, his body responding automatically to its overwhelming presence. Perfect natural balance, he observed with quiet wonder. I've never felt concentration this pure outside specific training locations in my world. Artemis nodded with evident satisfaction at his recognition. The grove maintains primordial harmony undisturbed since world's formation. Even gods entered here only after demonstrating appropriate respect for its fundamental patterns. The chariot halted beside a small clearing. A spring emerged from moss-covered stone, its water capturing moonlight in liquid silver pools. Artemis dismissed the vehicle with a gesture, indicating they would proceed on foot through increasingly sacred territory. Amaterasu, would you prefer awaiting our return here? Artemis inquired with formal courtesy that suggested established protocol. The grove's core responds most directly to wilderness aspects during night hours. The sun goddess inclined her head in graceful acknowledgement. I shall commune with the boundary aspects while you proceed inward. The harmonizer requires wilderness attunement to complete its calibration sequence. With arrangements established, Artemis led Naruto deeper into the grove, following pathways visible only through subtle energy patterns rather than physical markings. As they progressed, Naruto observed how the environment responded to Artemis's presence, branches shifting to clear their path, roots smoothing to prevent stumbles, ambient light adjusting to illuminate their way without disrupting nocturnal creatures. The grove recognizes you as extension of itself, he noted, impressed by the seamless integration. My domain encompasses wilderness in its purest expression, she confirmed, not merely hunting or wildlife but the fundamental balance that sustains natural systems. This place represents that balance in its most perfect form. They continued in companionable silence, Artemis clearly appreciating Naruto's ability to move through forest with shinobi stealth rather than disrupting the environment. After nearly an hour's journey, they reached their destination, a perfectly circular clearing where massive trees formed natural columns around a central pool that reflected stars with mirror precision. The heart of the grove, Artemis identified quietly. Few mortals have witnessed this place in the millennia since I claimed guardianship. The clearing radiated natural energy with such intensity that Naruto felt his chakra responding automatically, balancing and harmonizing without conscious direction. The sensation resembled sage mode preparation but more profound, as though the environment itself facilitated RFECT integration between his internal energy and external forces. This location would be ideal for understanding how your sage abilities interface with our world's natural systems, Artemis suggested, removing her bow and setting it respectfully aside, particularly with the harmonizer's added calibration potential. Naruto nodded agreement, producing the crystal sphere which now glowed with steady golden light. In this environment, it seemed to develop additional resonance patterns, silver-green frequencies interweaving with its solar bass tone. Following intuition, he seated himself beside the reflecting pool, assuming meditative posture while holding the harmonizer between his palms. Artemis positioned herself opposite him, her own meditation stance mirroring his with practiced precision. "Allow the grove to guide your energy gathering," she instructed quietly. "Rather than imposing your familiar patterns, observe how natural flow manifests here." Naruto closed his eyes, extending his awareness into the environment while deliberately suspending habitual chakra manipulation techniques. The grove's energy immediately responded, not merely surrounding him but seeming to recognize his receptive state, offering patterns that complemented his own natural frequencies without overriding them. The harmonizer served as intermediary, translating between his chakra system and the grove's primal energy. Where the solar temple had facilitated communication across dimensional boundaries, this environment enhanced fundamental connection with natural forces that transcended specific realms. As he achieved deeper harmonization, Naruto perceived the blessing markers on his back activating in sequence: Artemis's Hunter's Mark first, resonating directly with the grove's essence, then Hestia's Hearth Blessing, providing stabilizing foundation, and finally, Freya's Separate Crescent, contributing perspective that encompassed soul-level integration. The combined activation created something new, a balanced recognition pattern that interfaced between his original chakra system and this world's natural energy. Not Falna in traditional sense, but functional equivalent adapted to his unique constitution. Through this enhanced connection, Naruto perceived the world's underlying structure with unprecedented clarity, energy flows extending throughout Orario and beyond, concentrate. Nexus points where power gathered naturally, and most significantly, the dungeon's true nature is interdimensional convergence point rather than merely monster-producing labyrinth. The flying tomb, God markers appeared within this perception as brilliant anchors in the energy landscape, precisely positioned to monitor specific junction points while establishing transit capabilities between key locations. Their placement revealed sophisticated understanding of both the dungeon's structure and interdimensional mechanics. Most disturbingly, Naruto sensed massive energy accumulation occurring deep within the dungeon, power gathering around what appeared to be dormant technological system of non-human origin. The crystal formations they had encountered represented outer terminals of this larger network, which someone was systematically activating through precisely calibrated interventions. When he opened his eyes, Naruto found Artemis studying him with intense focus, her divine perception clearly sensing the enhanced awareness he had achieved. "You've synchronized with our world's fundamental patterns," she observed with quiet approval. "Far more rapidly than anticipated." The grove facilitated connection, Naruto acknowledged, feeling the balanced energy continuing to circulate through his system. "But I also perceived something concerning: activation sequences occurring throughout the dungeon's deeper levels. Someone is systematically initializing ancient systems buried beneath Orario." Artemis's expression hardened. "Did you identify their purpose?" "Not specifically, but the energy signature matches what we encountered during yesterday's expedition, the same presence that interrupted at the crystal tree and at Amaterasu's temple." He examined the harmonizer, which now pulsed with combined frequencies. "I believe they're preparing for something significant, possibly involving transit between worlds on larger scale than individual passage. Which aligns with the modified Flying Thunder God technique's apparent purpose," Artemis concluded grimly. "Establishing stable pathways for potential mass transfer." She rose gracefully to her feet, extending her hand to assist Naruto from his meditative position. The casual gesture carried surprising significance. Artemis rarely initiated physical contact according to Bell's previous comments about her typically reserved nature. "Tomorrow's expedition has acquired greater urgency," she stated as Naruto accepted her offered hand. "If ancient systems are being activated throughout the dungeon, coordinated response becomes essential rather than merely investigative." They proceeded back through the grove with increased purpose, though Artemis maintained respectful pace appropriate to the sacred environment. As they walked, Naruto noted subtle changes in her typically formal demeanor, occasional glances containing assessment beyond tactical evaluation, slightly decreased interpersonal distance, questions focused on his personal experiences rather than merely technical capabilities. "Your connection with natural energy differs fundamentally from conventional magic users in our world," she observed as They approached the boundary where Amaterasu awaited. Most forced compliance through imposed will, commanding elements to obey specified parameters. Your approach establishes partnership instead, acting natural systems while channeling their power cooperatively. That's the essence of sage techniques, Naruto confirmed. Harmony rather than dominance. The most powerful sages recognize their participating in existing systems rather than controlling them. Artemis nodded with evident approval. A philosophy aligned with my domain's fundamental principles. Perhaps explaining our blessing. Marker's particular resonance with your chakra system. The observation contained personal implications beyond technical assessment, subtle acknowledgement of compatibility extending into philosophica. Alignment rather than merely tactical cooperation. Naruto recognized the significant shift from her initial scientific detachment to more nuanced interest. They rejoined Amaterasu at the grove's boundary, finding the sun goddess in contemplative communion with ancient trees whose massive trunks contained patterns resembling solar symbols. She acknowledged their approach without interrupting her connection, completing what appeared to be energy exchange protocol before addressing them directly. The harmonizer has achieved multi-aspect calibration, she noted, observing the crystal's enhanced luminescence. Combined wilderness and celestial attunement should facilitate comprehensive interface with dungeon systems during tomorrow's expedition. We've detected systematic activation sequences occurring throughout deeper levels, Artemis informed her. Coordinated initialization suggesting specific agenda rather than merely exploratory investigation. Amaterasu's golden eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Alignment with astronomical convergence timing cannot be coincidental. The celestial conjunction occurring 3 days hence represents maximum dimensional membrane thinning, optimal conditions for large-scale transit between realms. This information added critical context to their observations. Someone's preparing for a major operation coinciding with this conjunction, Naruto concluded. Using Flying Thunder God markers to establish stable pathways while activating supporting systems throughout the dungeon. Which transforms tomorrow's expedition from investigation to intervention, Artemis stated grimly. We must interrupt these preparations before activation sequences complete. They boarded the chariot for return journey to Orario, conversation focusing on tactical planning rather than philosophical exchange. The harmonizer's enhanced capabilities would prove central to their strategy, allowing direct interface with crystal formations while potentially counteracting whatever techniques their mysterious opponent employed. As Orario's illuminated profile appeared on the horizon, Naruto considered the rapidly evolving situation. What had begun as disoriented revel in an unknown world had transformed into complex interdimensional crisis with potential consequences for both realms. The blessing markers on his back pulsed gently, reminding him of connections formed in this world, bonds that now extended beyond merely practical alliances into something more significant. Tomorrow's expedition would likely bring confrontation with whoever had placed the Ying Thunder God markers throughout the dungeon. Their identity remained uncertain, but Naruto felt growing conviction that he had encountered them previously in his world, someone with sophisticated understanding of space-time techniques and specific interest in interdimensional transit capabilities. The chariot descended toward Orario's eastern gate where guild officials awaited with final expedition preparations. Dawn approached rapidly, leaving little time for rest before their departure into the dungeon's depths. Whatever awaited below, Naruto would face it with both his original shinobi training and newly enhanced connection to this world's natural systems. The sage without Falna now balanced between realms just as he balanced between divine patrons. The nature of power, he reflected, as they rejoined Orario's complex social fabric, transcended specific techniques or energy sources. True strength emerged through connection rather than isolation, partnership rather than dominance. A lesson he had learned through hard experience in his world and now applied in this new realm where gods walked among mortals and ancient systems stirred beneath modern structures. Tomorrow would teach these principles against whoever sought to exploit interdimensional boundaries for their own purposes. Naruto Uzumaki, shinobi, sage, and now something unique between worlds, stood ready to defend the balance between realms. Just as he had once defended the balance between nations. Chapter 3 End. The End. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.